Hi, and welcome to The Seeker
and The Skeptic.
I'm Kat, and I'm the flaky, unpredictable, maybe a bit irrational Seeker.
And I'm Rebecca. I'll be your sarcastic, grumpy, close-minded, skeptical host. Or maybe we should just be ourselves.
Sounds good to me. This podcast is going to dive deep into the controversial topics that some may call New Age, or woo-woo, or just plain foolish.
And hopefully look at them with a skeptical but open-minded approach that will encourage understanding and acceptance from both the skeptics
and the seekers.
Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law.
Love is the law. Love under will.
That's right, listeners. This episode, we're wishing you
a very Crowley
Christmas!
Is there any more festive historical figure than the infamous occultist, Aleister Crowley?
Well, old St. Nick?
Yep, but we're going to be talking about him next episode.
Okay, so who is this guy, and why are you wearing that hat?
Oh, you noticed my hat. Well, it's an exact replica. You will see, if anyone follows us on Instagram, at Seeker Skeptic, that it's an exact replica of Aleister Crowley's own triangular shaped hat.
Yeah, tri-corner hat, I think it is.
Tri-corner, I like it. And it's got the Eye of Horus symbol there. Can I just say how hard it is to say this man's name?
I know, it's a nightmare, isn't it?
For some reason, and maybe I was wondering if English people are more prone to doing this, but for some reason it's really tempting just to say Crowley. It just looks like Crowley.
It does. It really does.
Al himself even said to people, it's pronounced Crowley, to remind you that I'm holy, but my enemies say Crowley, in wish to treat me foully. So if you need to remind yourself of how to say it, it's that.
It rhymes with holy. One of his enemies wrote a poem about him where he rhymed it with foully, Crowley, foully. So obviously stuck in his craw.
It's factual, everything. Anyway, Crowley was born October 12th, 1875, Royal Leamington Spa, England, and he died December 1st, 1947, which is significant, is it not?
It is significant. This is exactly why we're talking about him on right now, or releasing this episode on the 1st of December, because it is the anniversary of his death, which Thelemites, Thelema, we're going to be talking about this in a moment, is the religion that Crowley invented. Thelemites celebrate like a birthday, they celebrate the anniversary of other Thelemites' death. Not just famous ones, it's just a standard thing, which I think is actually a really lovely idea. They call it the Feast of Death, or a Feast of Death. So December the 1st is Crowley's Feast of Death.
Wow, his death day. I love it.
Yeah, happy death day, everyone!
He was also known as the Beast 666, and I believe he appointed himself that. And it was actually his mum that would call him Beast as a child. So good relationship there.
Wow.
As well as the wickedest man in Britain, which I think British press covered him as.
Yeah, well. I think that was not something he chose himself. That was something given him by the tabloids.
I imagine he was delighted him though.
Yeah.
He was kind of a Renaissance man in many ways. He was an avid mountaineer, a writer, a cult leader, a terrible poet, a great chess player. And
That's very judgmental of you.
And have you read it? Jeez.
I have. I liked it, but you don't like poetry.
I don't like Rumi. So, and quite possibly he was also maybe a spy for the British intelligence.
Oh, yeah, we're going to get into that.
And his best known book, I think I would say his best known one is called The Book of the Law, but maybe Thelemites would tell me other books, but he definitely wrote a bunch. And this was, I think, the first one that he channeled through a discarnate being called Awas, who we'll be introducing to you later. So, what did you think about Crowley before we started digging into this?
Well, he's kind of impossible to ignore in the sort of the topics that we talk about and the circles we move in nowadays. Right. He's had such an influence, but the big thing that he's had an influence on that made me aware of him is Wicker. Because the guy who created Wicker, the father of Wicker, as he's often called, Gerald Gardner, knew Aleister Crowley and based a lot of the writing that became sort of the liturgy of Wicker, of witches' circles. You can go back and listen to our episode on Wicker if you want more on this, is based on Crowley's writing. So, for example, the Wiccan Rede, which is like the Wiccan ethical statement, is "an it harm none, do what you will," which is obviously derived from how we started this podcast, the Thelemite thing. Love it, I can't even remember it now. Do what thou wilt should be the whole of the law. So they've taken that, and they've taken a lot of other things, a lot of his phrases. Yeah. So I knew about him, but I didn't know anything more than he influenced Wicker, and he was generally considered to be a bit of a degenerate.
Right.
Like drugs, pentagrams, all that cool, fun stuff. So I thought, what an interesting guy, but I didn't really know anything more than that.
But just quickly, were you... Did your like Wiccan friends like approve of him? Was he approved of, or was he also kind of the dark one in your space as well? Was he like the black magic versus the white
I
magic?
thought a lot of Wiccans aren't aware of how much of Wicker is based on Crowley's writing.
Okay, so it's not like somebody you'd really be discussing.
No, in fact, so Garner drew a lot of his original ideas from Crowley, but then people came along later, not that much later either, Doreen Valiente specifically, and she looked through everything he'd written, and he was sort of saying this is ancient wisdom that's been passed down through the generations of witches, and she looked at it and said, looks a lot like Crowley to me. Do you mind if I rewrite some of it? And she rewrote lots of it, so it sort of merged, and then the way Wicker works is everyone's adding to it and changing bits as it goes. So Crowley's influence is sort of, you don't have so much of his exact wording as you used to, so I think a lot of Wiccans don't know. But I think generally he is considered like he's the sort of person you don't want to be associated with.
He's still got that kind of stained reputation.
Yeah. How about you? Had you ever heard of him?
Well, I think my first memory was, I remember maybe a year or two ago, I actually asked you, who is that Crowley guy? And I can't remember if I'd heard of him before we'd spoken or you brought him up, and I just asked you to elaborate on that. One thing I do feel like I knew was that he was meant to be an unsavory character. It's like you kind of get that feeling.
Unsavory is such an understatement.
I remember like Googling him for the first time because I remember thinking that he was going to look like Snape from Harry Potter.
He does look a bit like Snape.
He looks nothing like Snape.
Oh.
He looks like this like kind of fat balding guy.
I guess it depends which age you look at him though.
Oh, I haven't seen young Crowley.
Yeah. Oh, young Crowley's quite attractive.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Well, that's a new poster for my wall. So anyway, you cleared up some questions for me about him, but I basically went from you kind of raised my opinion up of him to like a neutral opinion, like just an interesting character in history. And then it went down again. And that was just fairly recently when I found out that he was a bit of a dick to my hero, W.B. Yates, right? So they were both in the Golden Dawn at the same time, which maybe we'll touch on a little bit. But Crowley, I think, once stormed one of their meetings, which Yates was leading. He was super high up in that. And they had a kind of black magic versus white magic battle going on, it seems. So anyway, that's pretty much all I had there. But like, we basically wanted to get a first-hand experience of what Crowley was sharing and what it might mean to be a follower of Crowley. So now, listeners, we're going to do and lead you through the lesser ritual of the pentagram.
Yeah, we chose this. It's a fairly simple ritual compared to some of the ones they do. And we're drawing it from a book by David Shoemaker called Living Thelema, which is a really good book if you want to get an idea of what Thelemites believe and what they're up to. He's also a psychologist. So it's not all occultism. It's like occultism mixed with psychology, which is perfect for us. It suits both of our needs. But the lesser ritual of the pentagram is described as a foundational practice. Crowley recommends you do this ritual twice a day. And the idea is to clear the physical, psychological, and magical space so that you can enact things, so that stuff can happen. So it's like a sort of detoxification of everything. And we're going to invoke 4 archangels. I mean, archangels, you could conceptualize them as elements or as points of the compass, and you'll see us moving around the room. We're going to put this up on YouTube, so you can literally see it if you want, but we'll also describe it. So the idea is it can be used as an invocation or a banishing. We're going to do the invoking version to summon like good vibes for our podcasts and to clear away any negative energy that might be
in the air,
lingering.
Coming out of Rebecca's cat's butts.
Yeah, we're going to try and get the cats out of the way to make this happen. So we've got, the usual podcast setup.
This is how we always do our podcast.
We're in our Christmas PJs because it's a very Crowley Christmas. And a few candles. And, of course, the Seal of Solomon.
Right. I'd never seen this Seal of Solomon thing before, but is this typical Crowley setup?
Definitely. So this is it's like a classic symbol that I see. I just did a Google image search for Thelemite rituals to see what they had about. A lot of them had pentagrams, which we've also got, above the Seal of Solomon. So we have a black piece of paper on our table, large black piece of paper. The Seal of Solomon is in white chalk. I don't really know what these symbols mean. I just copied them from the Google Images.
Which you didn't tell me that we would be involving Saturn and Mars here, which are malefic planets, and I don't want to be invoking any Saturn and Mars energy here, but I guess this is what it calls for.
Yeah, it's already on, I'm afraid. I'm not rubbing it out now. And then on top of the Seal of Solomon, we have 5 tea lights in mason jars, obviously. And between those mason jars, they're connected with a red piece of string, which doesn't show up very well on camera, apparently.
It's beautiful, though, trust me.
And in the middle, in a place almost as if it was designed to go there, is my favourite kitchen knife. Well, my biggest kitchen knife, because we need a knife for this ritual.
Is that what they're called in ceremony? Do they become something else?
It could be athame.
Okay.
That's what you would call it in Wicker.
Right.
But I don't know what they call it in Thelema, so...
Okay, so we're going to start by centering ourselves with a couple of minutes of mindfulness meditation, because despite all of the occult paraphernalia, Thelema rituals actually are mostly mental exercises, something that you might have come across in like a yoga class.
But to keep it interesting for our listeners and viewers, let's just make it 3 breaths of mindfulness before we get going. Okay, the first part of the ritual is called the Kabbalistic Cross. It's similar to the Christian sign of the cross, when you touch your shoulders, forehead and stomach to make a cross shape, but it's a little bit different. So, should we go?
Yes. So, first of all, we're going to be touching our forehead with our right forefinger.
Ate.
Touching our heart.
I was.
Touching our genitals.
Malkuth.
Touch our right shoulder.
Vegebura.
Left shoulder.
Vegebula.
Clasp hands on breast.
Leoem. Amen.
So now Rebecca is going to be moving to each compass point and making the pentagram sign, which is like a 5-pointed star. So starting in the east. Yod He Vav He. To the south. Adonai. She's also doing a kind of pointy thing with her hands at the end of the star. Oh, and she's using the knife as well. That was to the west. And finally to the north. Ata Gibor Leolam Adonai. Nice.
So now we're going to turn to the east to invoke the Archangels, and we'll say together, before us, Raphael, behind us, Gabriel, on our right hand, Michael, on our left hand, Uriel, for about us flames the pentagram, and in the column shines the 6-rayed star.
Okay, so now we should be visualizing the Archangels. And in the book Living Thelema, David Shoemaker describes them like this. So Raphael is in the east, dressed in a yellow robe with violet trim, and he bears a sword or dagger. Gabriel is in the west, wearing a blue robe with orange trim, bearing a cup. Michael is in the south, wearing a red robe with a green trim, bearing a wand. And Uriel in the north is wearing a black robe with white trim, bearing a disc or a pentacle.
Got 'em. Right, now we finish up by repeating the Kabbalistic Cross that we started with.
Ate, I was, Malkuth, Vegebura, Vegebula,
Lealoem.
That was so good.
With a little background accompaniment.
I know, it was perfect.
From my beloved cats.
Oh, that's awesome. Okay, so, well, do you think the Archangels made their presence?
To be honest, probably not.
I don't think that my laughter at touching my genitals and saying Malkuth was helping.
I also got left and right mixed up on the beginning, so if we did invoke something, it might have been the wrong thing that we were going for. I also think, I mean, obviously, this is the first time we've ever tried this ritual, so it doesn't come smoothly to us yet.
We need practice.
Yeah. I think one of the things about ritual is when it becomes habitual and you've done it so many times. It's like yoga. Like if you've done a yoga movement loads of times, your body sort of almost does it naturally. And I imagine that's true with these sort of rituals too.
Well, because I think David Shoemaker suggests doing this like every day.
Yeah.
So imagine doing this every day. I mean, I can't imagine... I mean, maybe it doesn't take that long once you get used to it. Or maybe people have a permanent place in their home where they can just like, you know, get it on.
Yeah.
Every
Yeah,
day.
if you know all the words off by heart and you've got your Seal of Solomon there permanently, then you don't need to worry, do you? And you maybe all this gets shorthanded as well. They love to do the shorthand.
Right. So you're just saying like, you know, you're just kind of making sounds. Yeah, I quite enjoyed it. Like, I liked the saying the words, the creepy words. And I think it's pretty. It's nice to have candles lit. Yeah,
it is beautiful. And it, surprisingly, even though we set this up obviously to do it as a bit of a performance for the podcast, as soon as you turn the lights off and put the candles on, that sort of atmosphere is conjured, isn't it? It's a bit magical.
It is. And had I spent, you know, we spent more time maybe in the meditative part at the start.
Yeah.
If I wasn't giggling, maybe this could start to, you know, get you into an altered state, perhaps.
Do you think... I mean, was it scary? Because you were a bit intimidated to begin with.
Well, as soon as I saw Saturn and Mars there, I mean, who knows? Who knows what we've done today? But
do you think all your astrology friends will be judging you?
I think I'm going to get some astro judgment.
But it didn't actually feel scary, or at least, but maybe that's partly because we weren't so practiced that it felt real.
Right.
Maybe it would start to feel more scary the more we got into it.
I'm sure.
Or the opposite. Who can say? And I mean, this was supposed to be to clear out energy so that we can proceed with the rest of our podcast about Crowley and make the best podcast so far. So what do you reckon? Do you feel the good podcast vibes?
I mean, only time will tell. Only ratings will tell, I guess.
Indeed. Yeah, please rate and subscribe. The people who actually practice Thelema, not all of them, but many of them, are part of a group called the Order Tempor Orientalis, or the Order of Oriental Templars, or the OTO. And luckily, there's a fairly local, I mean, we had to drive for a while, OTO group. So we went to meet them to see what they're all about.
Yeah. And I guess my first kind of question about all of this was how does the OTO differ from Thelema? Can you practice Thelema on your own? And you can, as far as I know.
I mean, that's definitely seems to be what David Shoemaker was saying in the Living Thelema book, that you can be a Thelemite and, you know, you can just be a solo practitioner, or you can join up with this group which will help you and, you know, like give structure to your practice, I guess. But it's not as easy as just going to a meetup on meetup.com.
Right, you had to pull some real strings.
Yeah, I shot out a few emails and I got a couple of no responses, or just you know, we don't have a group in this area anymore, or we don't have people who don't know, you know, who we don't know come to our rituals, because I really wanted to go to a Gnostic mass.
Yeah.
That's the big thing that Thelemites do. I think they do it once a month in London. That is vaguely public, like you have to be invited, but yeah, people can, in theory, come. But I couldn't wangle my way into a Gnostic mass. But I did meet a really nice guy, one of the few people who responded to me, who runs a local group, who said he was willing to sit down and have a chat with us about it. And have a chat like in the like kind of vaguest terms. They're not going to reveal any secrets.
Right.
They're just sort of giving us idea of what is, because we're interested. Yeah. And it was actually really generous of them to give up their time. And I hope they're listening. So hi, if you're listening.
Yeah, completely. So we went to a pub on a Sunday afternoon, which is, you know, it's maybe not the darkest, scariest thing that, you know, people who don't know much about Crowley might assume.
It was a lovely sunny Sunday as well, in this gorgeous pub, and we're looking around for the guy in the robes, and it turns out the guy that we're meeting with is just like a normal looking dude,
very casual,
very friendly.
It's all quite normal, basically. And I think what did we ask for? Well, I don't think we asked much. I think I can say that he's the body master, which
that's
is
like his
the role.
title for being the leader of that particular camp. And they have different organizations. So a camp is kind of like a training group for Thelemites who are sort of working their way up, and then they have other groups. I can't remember what they call.
I think there was an oasis.
Yes.
And then is it a lodge?
A lodge,
right?
Yeah.
Anyway, so he'd done something really amazing. I think there had been a lodge in the location for quite some time, quite a, you know, an old lodge. And everyone in it was very high up and developed in the, what do they call them? The different stages.
The grades?
The grades, yeah. But the problem with that is that newcomers find it hard to kind of break into that. Like, imagine going to a group meeting and like everyone is practicing some like amazing magic stuff and you are just starting out. So what the Bodymaster did was start his own camp. And so it's only like a few, like maybe 5 or 6 regular members of that. Which is, I mean, it's interesting because this is something that's existed. The OTO has existed since, I'm not quite sure.
Well, certainly since Crowley's days.
Yeah, and it is all over the world. I mean, not all over the world, but like you'd be surprised the different places they have. And anyway, it was a bit like, I don't know, I feel like it's a little bit sad that it's like, few in number.
Yeah, what did he keep saying? Our members are few and secret.
Yeah.
But they didn't seem to be worried about the fact that it was few and secret at all.
That was another big thing. He was like, we don't advertise, we're not trying to like recruit people. That's just really not what this is about.
I know, I was tempted when he said our members are few and secret, I was going to say, like our podcast listeners.
Right. Yeah. And I was tempted to be like, can I just like help you with marketing? I mean, like, can I just throw out some...
But that's the whole point. Like the fact that I had to go on a bit of a journey to track down this guy and arrange this meeting. He said that's deliberate. They don't want people who aren't really interested bothering them.
And that they are attracting the people. And I quite like that. That's almost kind of going into the sort of magical realms. It's like, if you seek it, you shall find.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what else did we cover?
Well, a couple of other Thelemites turned up to chat, and they were just like the Bodymaster. The Bodymaster sounds like such and it was in his email as well. Like that was his, I don't know whether it's his email address or in his header or something. And I was like, oh, that's a bit of an intimidating term. Right. But yeah, it's not as intimidating as it sounds, and he certainly wasn't. And the other people weren't either. Yeah. They were just really lovely. There were 2 guys and a woman. And they were, just normal people.
Yeah.
I know, I feel like I'm repeating myself, but I think a lot of our listeners, our few and secret listeners, will be expecting these people to be wearing robes.
Right.
But they were making little jokes about, we didn't bring any goats today.
Yeah, I appreciated the goat jokes. And again, just like generous with information. When I ask these kind of questions, which, I mean, some of them, it's always kind of difficult when you're questioning somebody about their belief system. I'm always scared that, we might offend by even asking some questions, but they were very generous, considering that there's also a general principle from what it sounded like, which is they don't want to try to force anything down your throat.
Yeah.
And like, I think the Bodymaster at one point says, we're here to learn and to share, but we're not like teaching. We're not like trying to give you this particular information and insist that you act on just that. It's very open like that.
Yeah, I mean the whole sort of ethos, as you might imagine from "Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law," is very individualistic.
Yeah,
and they make that. Thelema doesn't prescribe any particular moral code or anything like that. You make your own, and what goes with that, obviously, is that they have to be super respectful of each other's.
Right.
So they're not going to be telling you what to think or what to do or what to believe or anything like that. They see Thelema in a way. Actually, I don't think I asked whether they conceptualized it as a religion or not, because they did seem to be presenting it more as like something. In fact, I remember him saying a couple of times, the Bodymaster said that Thelema wraps around whatever belief system you already have. And one of the guys we met was a Buddhist Thelemite, for example. He didn't see any conflict in that. Yeah. Thelema just wrapped around the belief system that he already subscribed to.
Yeah, in that way, it reminds me of something that's closer to like a self-development program. Like, let's say you were like interested in CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. That doesn't mean you need to be a Catholic. Like, it's just these 2 things can exist side by side. What also interested me was the fact that, like a lot of, I guess, faiths or belief systems or whatever practices, there are disagreements within the group. So I do think there's like so much wiggle room within it to read things your own way. And one of the questions that I had asked, I think we had touched on the Book of the Law, which we'll talk about later in the podcast. It's the book that Crowley wrote. Straight away, that was one thing that's like, well, we don't really discuss that. And here's why.
I know. When he said we don't really discuss the Book of Law, Oh no, he said, he didn't even qualify. He was like, we don't discuss the book of the law. And I was like, ooh, have we hit on something? And then he was like, because?
Yeah.
And his explanation was really reasonable.
Completely, because everyone gets something different from the book. They're not, again, trying to teach you a certain way of thinking or seeing the world. It's like every time you read the book, you might get something different out of it. Different things are going to come to you at different stages in your journey. Really, like, made me want to read it properly. I think I've dipped into it a bit, but this really made me want to really sit with it. And I guess that's the idea. You're meant to like meditate on these words, and you don't know what's going to come to you. You don't have to understand it. You don't have to read it like a
like a Bible,
Cliff Notes. There is no Cliff Notes version of it, and maybe it is like a religious text in that sense.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, you don't have to read it like a Bible. You don't have to be literal about it.
Okay.
But I guess a lot of Christians aren't literal about their Bible. So this is the key text of Thelema. If I'm sure they wouldn't describe it as their Bible, but for just convenience sake, let's say that's kind of their Bible, and their main tenet is, as we've already said, doest thou wilt is the whole of the law. Love is the law. Love under will. And Thelema actually means will in Greek, interestingly, which is why it's the name of the religion. But I think a lot of people, when I've been researching this, have a misconception of what will is. Mm. Have you noticed this? Like, people will say, oh, do what thou wilt is the whole of the law, which means you can do whatever you like. That is not what Thelema's about. And
I think a lot of people really start from that place. Like, no, that's not what this means. I don't think that there are. If there are any Thelemites who really think literally do whatever you want and with disregard for other people's feelings and safety, like, if there are any like that, there are probably very few.
Yeah.
That's the sense that I get.
So the concept of will that they're referencing when they say do as thou wilt. In fact, I was reading Crowley specifically considered saying do as thou will, but do what you want. But he actually changed it to do as thou wilt,
because will is
something different, and what it means to them is something like
it's almost like your dharma, if you want to.
Yeah, it's accessing the correct path for you to be on. Your true will is something you find by doing a lot of introspection, and of course magical and occult workings to access kind of like a higher. It's not just your desires, it's almost like a drive that pulls you through life.
And it's your true self. So that was this really amazing thing that I think we both were like, drop the mic, the Body Master just shared something really amazing with us, which is this idea of what the true self is. And he used this analogy. Can you do it? You'll probably do it better than me. The analogy of like a
seed in a jar.
Right.
Yeah, so he's saying that your true self is kind of like a seed in a jar, in like a mason jar. And
specifically a mason jar.
And when we're in a hipster pub, and when you're born, it's just the seed in the jar.
It's clear the seed can see out.
But as experiences happen to you, the jar gets all full of detritus, basically. Detritus, sure. Whatever. It gets all full of soil and shit. Maybe literally shit if you're unlucky. And the process of finding your way back to that seed, you have to chuck all the soil out of the jar so that the seed can, like, you have to figure out what bits you keep and what bits you don't keep.
And that's it. It's not as simple as just like emptying the jar. It's like, this is a process of working out which of these are good for you and which are not, and I guess which are aligned with your will and which aren't. It's life's work, and it kind of leads me now to think about the HGA, the Holy Guardian Angel, which is something that I was really keen to learn more about.
I love all their abbreviations. Like, there were so many things that they would, like the HGA and the ETC and all these like little abbreviations they throw in of the different groups and orders and stuff. It just made it seem even more secret and interesting.
Terminology is the funnest thing. Like, yeah. But so much of the work, let's say the great work is to do with knowledge and conversation with the Holy Guardian Angel, and again we'll talk a little bit more about this later, but I'm not sure if this is true, but I feel like that's the thing that's going to help you lead you to your will. Like, that's the thing that guides you.
I think that's exactly the name of the game, is to get your shit together, figure out who you are, get rid of the parts of yourself that you don't like and that you don't feel like they represent who you really are. And then, or maybe this happens, maybe it isn't so, maybe it's not so linear, but then you get to meet your Holy Guardian Angel, who's kind of a manifestation of your true self.
Right.
And they will give you wisdom and lead you.
Yeah, it's interesting because there are so many different ways of talking about the HGA, and this is probably another episode, but it's kind of like the daimon that Socrates had.
Yeah.
The thing that told him, don't run away. These people want to kill you, but stay. Like, don't run. Also, Yates did talk about this stuff as well. Like, it's... Oh, and then I think about the kind of part of, like, the New Age community would be the inner voice. This kind of, like, Abraham Hicks stuff. It's like this idea that you have this true self inside you that you can communicate with, that can communicate with you. And actually accessing that requires things like quietening the mind, meditation, different kinds of spiritual practices can help you contact this thing. And that's also going to be the thing that leads you to do your will.
Yeah.
Anyway, it's just like a really, I don't know, I find it's a really appealing idea for me.
And especially when I was reading the Shoemaker book, I was like, this is just like some kind of new self-help thing, but it's packaged in a much cooler way, even cooler than Stoicism.
Right.
Like, last month we were talking about Stoicism, I was like, oh, I'm all about Stoicism now, maybe onto Thelema. But the problem, obviously, is even though it's got cool packaging and all the sigils and stuff, there is quite a lot of supernatural and sort of stuff that's beyond my materialistic vision of the universe, which I can't really get on board with. But what I did like, especially about the HGA, is the Body Master said about almost every question we asked, in fact, he said, look, you're going to get a different answer from every Thelamite. Yeah. Some people think there's literally a HGA who is separate to you, external, who is in communion with the divine. Some people see it more as like a secret kernel of the self, like your true self, and some people see it as something else, like you never, it doesn't really matter because the work is the same.
That's a really beautiful thing, because I'm always worried, especially when I'm talking about these things and belief systems. It's like, am I doing it right? I'm sure there are people out there who are just disagreeing. I feel like a big part of this is, well, yeah, how do you interpret this? What's helpful for you?
Yeah,
which is amazing.
I find it hard. I actually asked the Thelamite who used to be a Buddhist, or who is a Buddhist, sorry, a Thelamite Buddhist. I asked him, how do you reconcile the concept? Because in Buddhism, the whole point is to realize, or at least my conception of Buddhism was, the whole point is to realize that there is no self.
Right.
So how can you be a Buddhist who thinks there is no self, and also a Thelamite who's all focused about finding the true self? And he said, again, just such lovely people. He was like, oh yeah, you completely understand one strand of Buddhism, but there's this other strand of Buddhism which does have a sense of the self, and that's more the one that I'm aligned with. But personally, I'm not sure I really believe in a true self. And maybe we'll talk about this as the podcast goes on, because we can't really avoid it. But I'm not sure. And one of the obstacles to me, apart from the supernatural things, to me becoming part of Thelema, is that I'm not even really sure that I have a true self.
Sure. Yeah, we can discuss this, because again, I think a lot of this comes down to just like terminology and like how are you imagining this thing, and a lot of this for me is what's helpful for you to imagine. I really like this idea of there being again, going back to this idea that there is this kind of like path that is right. It's just a lot to do with like morals and like your conscience.
I have felt the phrase, a lot of phrases from Thelema, but particularly the great work, slip into my everyday conversation since we started researching this, because it's just such a good way to put it. Like when you're sitting down to read, when you're sitting down to read Marcus Aurelius, what are you engaged in? You're engaged in the great work. Yeah. You're developing yourself. Yes. You're exploring yourself. All that stuff. I think is a good way to think. And also, it's just super cool that there are people getting together and having these conversations about these important issues. And it kind of doesn't matter to some degree what banner they're doing it under. Yeah. But finding people like these people who are interested in talking philosophy and doing it on a regular basis and interested in each other's growth as people. And then also the power of ritual, which we just experienced. Yeah.
So, and just to kind of say that, we don't know in depth what happens when these lovely people meet up, but we do know that they meet up, is it almost, I think, four times
3 or 4 times a month, they said, yeah. So they're in regular contact with each other.
Which is great. And I think they used to have a temple, but now they do it in like a living room, but like they still have that kind of ritual. I think they have workshops, which I guess when people just like sharing what they know, talking about different things. I mean, I'd love to. Anyway, we'll talk about our takeaways.
Yeah, they do. They did keep some of the details quite vague, but it was a nice sort of vagueness in that I didn't feel like I was being like anything was being kept secret.
Yeah.
They were like honest about it. He was just like I can't tell you what goes on in the meetings.
Yeah.
This is, that's not something I'm going to share with you. I'm like, well, that's cool. Yeah. Like, you don't need to be mysterious about it. You can just be like, that's our practice, and it's not for you, and unless you decide to join.
Yeah.
So that was really cool. He did allude to candles and incense, so I assume they're part of it. And we got a vague taste of what maybe some of it would be like from doing that ritual.
There may or may not be goats there.
Yeah, that's the other thing. He talked about initiation, and he said a lot of people are very scared of initiation because it sounds quite intimidating, but there's no need to be scared. And then he corrected himself, said, well, you probably should be a little bit scared,
Right.
which I think is cool, because it's like, you should, like, this is scary.
Yeah.
Working on yourself is
Yes.
kind of intimidating. There'd be no point in doing it if there wasn't challenge.
And from the sounds of it, I mean, let's say that this work, if you continue to do it, there are going to be points, let's say, that great changes, whether they're internal or external, are going to scare you.
Yeah.
And that is really exciting, because, of course, it's doing something. You're not just doing this purely for shits and giggles. Like, even though that's also kind of appealing. But no, stuff will happen, and it will be scary, and we're not going to pretend it's not.
Yeah.
That's good.
So we walked out into a lovely sunshiny day, which is weird this time of year, and I was just feeling like kind of relieved, I guess, because I hadn't known what to expect.
Sure.
And it just went so well. And you were really good at talking to them as well.
Thank you. I try.
Because sometimes when we're doing research, like when we were in the in Rendlesham Forest, talking to those forest rangers, Kat would just completely shut down, and I had to run the conversation.
Yeah.
But you were brilliant. Like, you were really engaged with them. I think that's because you're genuinely interested.
That's the thing. I can't feign the interest, and I think it's hard when we're doing the kind of, and this, we can just talk about this, but it's hard when we're doing the kind of journalistic thing. Like, we're kind of doing research, but we're also doing it for personal interest, and it's a really fine line, because especially when you like the people so much, it's like, oh, I don't want to now be like talking about you. But I mean, that's kind of why I also found when we're doing the Rendlesham stuff, these are real people. It can be hard to do the grilling thing.
Yeah.
But like I said, fortunately, I'm genuinely interested in this stuff, and they were very lovely. And so when we left, just feeling like, we're both introverts, but I felt like very energized. This show has already taken us to some strange places, literally and metaphysically, and we love making it for you.
If you enjoy listening and have $1 a month to spare, we'd appreciate your support on Patreon.
Patreon is a platform for supporting content creators like us.
If you pledge $1 a month, we'll spend it on boring things like hosting fees and audio equipment.
And fun things like psychic readings, crystal healing, ayahuasca retreats.
Yeah, we'll spend it on drugs.
There are lots of adventures we'd like to go on. So if you want us to go hunting for the Loch Ness Monster, visit a haunted castle or Area 51, you're going to have to chip in.
We think having conversations about this stuff, paranormal, spiritual, weird stuff, is really important, especially between people who don't agree. Having these experiences is fun, doing the research is interesting, but the most important thing is the conversations.
We hope listening to our podcast will inspire you to start talking to people you would normally dismiss as grumpy old skeptics.
Or flaky woo-woo seekers.
If you think these sorts of conversations are important too, you can support us on Patreon. And as a supporter, for as little as $1, you'll be able to vote on upcoming show ideas.
And if there's something you're desperate for us to look into, whether it's acupuncture or vampires, Patreon supporters' requests will always go to the top of our consideration list.
Find out more at patreon.com/Seeker Skeptic. And that's Patreon spelt Patreon.
Crowley was born October 1875. Let me set the scene. It was a dark and stormy night.
Oh, we should have sound effects.
It was one of the worst storms, in that area at that time. It was terrible. There was flooding, livestock were killed, trees uprooted, telegraph poles fallen down, railway station was all flooded out. This is Royal Leamington Spa. Crops destroyed. People had to evacuate in boats. We don't know if Crowley's mother had to evacuate or not. But
wasn't he born in the summer? This is madness.
No, October.
Oh, October, sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So when the storm abated, the day after this terrible, terrible storm, Edward Alexander Crowley was born. as I said, Leamington Spa, which is sort of central England, into a wealthy family there. I read this great book. Well, to be honest, I read the first few chapters, read 25% of this great book called Perdurabo, The Life of Aleister Crowley by Richard Kaczynski, which I would recommend. It's like the most highly recommended biographer of Crowley. And why it's so highly recommended is because it's like very footnoted and detailed and gets all the facts right, which not all of them do. But the problem with that is it's incredibly long and a bit boring. So I did my best, but you'll probably notice that I have more information about the beginning of his life because those are the chapters that I read than the end. So anyway, yeah, born Edward Alexander Crowley, 1875 October, into a wealthy family. They're wealthy because his grandfather and great-grandfather and so on were involved in some kind of brewery business. They ran like these weird mini pubs. They were like the first pubs that also sold sandwiches. In fact, they say that the Crowley family invented the Pub-Lunch. Yeah.
Like the Ploughmans?
Yeah, exactly.
Oh my goodness.
So yeah, every time you eat Ploughmans.
The Ploughmans.
Is the Ploughmans a thing in America?
No, we should just leave that a mystery and get the Americans to look it up.
Google images, you'll see what we're talking about. So his father was raised Quaker, but joined the Exclusive Brethren, sometimes called the Plymouth Brethren, which is like a really intense kind of Puritan Christian sect. And when his mother married his father, she joined the Exclusive Brethren too. One of the things about the Exclusive Brethren is you're not allowed to associate with people who aren't Exclusive Brethren. That's why they're exclusive. So she just cut herself off from all her family when she married. So you have to imagine these people, they're wealthy, but they're kind of isolated, and they're only mixing with other people who have this very puritanical interpretation of Christianity. So they don't celebrate Christmas, which is kind of ironic for our Crowley Christmas episode. Weirdly, I was going to say earlier, actually, Crowley never celebrated Christmas either. He didn't, that's not one of the things. He rebelled against his family's Christian upbringing, but he never got into Christmas. And towards the end of his life, he sent people anti-Christmas cards. And he kept like a little list in the back of his journal of all his friends that he was sending anti-Christmas cards so he could tick them off.
I can see you starting to do that.
I think I might. Yeah, it's a weird, it's kind of a weird thing though, because he's engaging with Christmas.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Because why, if you truly didn't like Christmas, Mr. Crowley,
just ignore it. Yeah, love it.
Anyway, so yeah, you've got this weird, very Spartan faith. No rituals, nothing like that. You talk to God just in your head, praying quietly on a hard floor, on your bare knees. Wow. It's like completely unlike what he was going to go on to develop. So as Kat said, he never got on well with his mother. She referred to him as the beast because obviously it's a Christian family. That actually inspired him to go away and read the Book of Revelation at a very young age, and it just blew his mind, as it would. Have you ever read the Book of Revelation?
No.
Oh my goodness, neither have I.
But good job for not pluralizing it, because don't some people say the Book of Revelation? They
do, and that's exactly what I would have said before I started doing this research.
I found that too. We must have read the same thing.
I know, I've got that in bold. Remember not to say this wrong. The only knowledge I have of the Book of Revelation is from a Trevor Moore song, High in Church. Have you heard that one? Anyway, I'll quote from that song since that's my only reference point. And I'll put a link in the show notes to the video. It's worth watching. It's hilarious. It says, so this is like a song, and it goes like this. It says some beautiful things about forgiveness and love till I get to the end where God comes back, wilds out, and straight up fucks Earth up. Holy shit, did you know this? Read this last bit. What the fuck? Spoiler alert, God comes back with dragons and murders everyone. What happened to the lovey-dovey stuff from the other verse? Oh shit, man, I can't handle this right now. I'm high in church.
Oh, you played this to me. Yes, it's awesome.
Such a good song.
Links back in the show notes.
That's just a couple of verses from it. That's basically all I know about the Book of Revelations. But I do know there's Revelation. But I do know that there is the Great Beast, 666. He comes down to Earth. He marks his numbers on the foreheads of his followers and cavorts with a scarlet harlot. Ooh. And there's a war in heaven between what's described as woman clothed in sun and the devouring beast. So it's basically war in heaven, war on earth, everything is a mess. And then eventually God intervenes, destroys evil, sets up a new situation in which the righteous will live forever. That's nice. The Book of Revelation-ish. So despite all this, despite the incredibly strict religious upbringing and being referred to as the beast by his mother, Aleister Crowley actually described these years of his childhood up to the age of 10 or so as being perpetual happiness. Huh. He was quite content. He loved his Bible and he liked the situation. But when he was 12, his father got really sick. He got sick with tongue cancer. And the doctor recommended surgery. I guess they just would have had his tongue out. Wow,
but he was a kind of like a preacher, so...
Yeah, ironic. So I don't know how lung cancer is treated now.
And how do you can't speak after that, right?
Yeah. So obviously the father was very reluctant to do that. Yeah. So he turned to our good old friend homeopathy.
Oh.
Yeah. Oh.
It worked, right?
As listeners may or may not know, homeopathy is famous for being something that doesn't work. So he died. It was actually electro-homeopathy, which doesn't involve electricity. It involves plants, like, you know, the idea of like bioelectricity, like I guess people think that like whatever makes plant grows is kind of like electricity, so they call it bioelectricity. And anyway, he went to a quack doctor, probably suffered horribly, I don't know, and then died. Another victim of alternative medicine. And that's basically so we can actually blame everything about Crowley's life on alternative medicine. He should be a skeptic hero, because that's when he describes his boyhood in hell starting. Oh. His dad's dead. His mum, who he doesn't get on with, is now his sole caregiver. And he starts getting really sick. He has whooping cough. He's just really he's suddenly he was quite robust as a younger man, as I understand it. And then from the age of 12 onwards, he's just having a really hard time. Just all these illnesses happening. He's going to getting kicked around from school to school because he's a troublemaker. In fact, this one particular school, I think it was a Plymouth Brethren school in Hastings, maybe, which is quite near to us. In fact, we did pop over to Hastings to see where he died, but we'll get around to that at the end. So he went to school at this place, and it was so strict. And they would, if he did something wrong, which would be minor infractions, then everyone in the school would be instructed not to speak to him, including the teachers. So you can imagine that that isolation, and this is a boarding school as well. So not having anyone speaking to you for weeks on end, perhaps, because you've broken their stupid rules. I'm already on his side. And of course, corporal punishment was a thing back then. So he would get I haven't from the biography here. I have a note saying he was caned. They said 15 strokes on the legs, as flogging the buttocks excites the victim's sensuality.
Oh, but it clearly didn't really help.
Well, there's obviously something already they're noticing something a bit weird about this young boy. They can't punish him in the normal way.
Oh, so this was specific for Crowley. Oh, hilarious.
Yeah.
Oh, my goodness.
So basically, this experience turns him off Christianity, as you would imagine. And the big problem that he's wrestling is sin, because he's constantly being accused of sinning. He's worrying about whether he's sinning in his own head. It's preoccupying him. He's trying to avoid it, but he can't. It's just so. At some point, he decides that he's going to embrace it, and this is
fair enough.
This is what happens. He heads off to university. He's starting to get over his kind of sickly childhood, and actually becomes an amazing mountaineer. And he does. I mean, there are a million stories about his amazing exploits as a mountaineer, but the one that really struck me was this. There was this Victorian fad of chalk cliff climbing. So I don't know if we live right near the coast, and there's some big chalk cliffs near us, so this is really familiar to us, but perhaps people don't know. In the coast of England, in some places, there's just this drop-off, a completely vertical drop-off, and it's all crumbly chalk. I mean, the White Cliffs of Dover.
And really crumbly.
Yeah, really crumbly, and really steep, and really vertical. And he just decided he was going to have a go at that. As a young man, as a teenager, just starting university, he was up and down these cliffs. There was an area near Beachy Head, which is not far from us, which was named Crowley's Crack, but it's now fallen into the sea, which shows you how crumbly it is, because he was the only one who got, or the first one to get up there or something. But this is just an incredibly dangerous pastime that only incredibly fit people could do, basically, and incredibly reckless people, I suppose. So I actually had a bit of a Google, because in the biography it said, oh, this was just a Victorian thing. People don't do it anymore. But there are some crazy people still doing it, so good on them, I suppose. Anyway, so that's what he's doing in his holidays. But whilst he's at university, he's working super hard. In fact, he decided he was just going to study all night. So he woke up at midnight and then studied through till the early hours of the morning, and then slept. So he didn't really have any friends, because he's completely off their schedule, which is weird. And he's focusing on philosophy, and then he changes to literature, and he's just unpopular, writing lots of weird poetry. And as I said, he looked the part back then. He had floppy silk shirt, long, slightly curly hair. He was a handsome chap.
I need to Google him.
Yeah, Google image search. Everyone, stop your cars, pull over, Google image search young Aleister Crowley, see if you agree with me. But he was he was sort of finding it all a bit unsatisfying. He wanted something that was, in his words, a material in which to work, which is immune from the forces of change. Because he was like, I can write poetry and that's one thing. I can climb a mountain, that's one thing. But I want something more, I don't know, something more bigger.
Permanent and lasting. He was a Leo rising. He wanted to live
There you go. So a big sort of turning point in his life in 1896 was his first mystical / homosexual sexual experience. We don't have much details about this because Crowley sort of writes in quite a vague way, but I'll tell you what he said. He said, I was awakened to the knowledge that I possessed a magical means of becoming conscious and satisfying a part of my nature which had, and up till that time, concealed itself from me. It was an experience of horror and pain, combined with a certain ghostly terror, yet at the same time it was the key to the purest and holiest spiritual ecstasy that exists. So we don't know exactly what happened here.
Wow.
But it seems like he was on holiday from university, he hooked up with some dude, they had sex, and it was transformative. And it was when he realized he was bisexual, obviously, and it was when he realized there was like a deeper level to experience. And we're going to talk a bit in a minute about like sex magic and stuff. But this connection of the mystical and the sexual runs throughout his life from this point. Comes back to university, and he encounters a strong new sin, in his words. Herbert Charles Pollitt, who was like a couple of years older, same university, and he was a drag queen. And was
that popular back then?
Well, he was in Footlights, which is like the Cambridge Amateur Dramatics thing. He seemed to be well liked, so I guess people liked him. Again, very handsome young man, and him and Crowley I don't know whether I'm projecting, but when I read about it, it seems like first love.
Right.
Like they're just all over each other all the time, and like suddenly all of Crowley's poetry is about this dude. Huh. He says, he said, I lived with Pollitt as his wife for 6 months and he made a poet out of me.
That's so sweet.
Oh, I know. Yeah. So it seems like this is, I don't know. And then later, he refers back to this experience, even many years later. Wow. He's still reflecting on this what I think is his first true love. But who knows? Because he had been fucking lots of women as well. But he doesn't write about them. Yeah. So anyway, unfortunately, although, it was magical for a while, but they ended up breaking up because Pollitt wasn't really interested in the spiritual stuff that he was pursuing. And he was just like, I've got to... So he gets out of university, joins the Golden Dawn to keep this journey going of developing his spiritual side. The Golden Dawn is like a kind of secret, semi-secret organization. I think he heard about it from his mountaineering chums, because a lot of them were into that stuff. Popular back then, right? Yeah, especially amongst like rich guys,
creative people, all the romantics,
a lot of time on their hands, independently wealthy, climbing mountains, talking about alchemy. Hey, do you want to join the Golden Dawn?
Sounds like our lives.
Yeah, it does, doesn't it? I wish we were independently wealthy. But yeah, so he's found somewhere where he can develop his spirituality and all this stuff that he's been thinking about without the God bit looming over. And he's initiated, when was he initiated? 1898. So this is, just out of university, basically, by a guy called Samuel Liddell McGregor Mathers. And he took the name Frater Perdurabo, which he interpreted as I shall endure to the end. So when you join the Golden Dawn, and also when you join the OTO, you get that prefix, Frater.
Oh, yeah.
I think maybe it's Frater for men and sister for women, or maybe it's different depending on what grade you're in. Because I've seen women writing under the name Sister, whatever their name is, and I've seen men writing under Frater. Anyway, who knows? So he takes the new name, and he's getting into it. He's spending lots of time with all these people, studying the occult, doing all the rituals. Unlike the Freemasons, they admit women. So he's meeting women there and generally having a really good time. Although making himself a little bit unpopular because he does insist on sleeping with people's wives.
Such a dick.
Yeah. And he's working up through the orders, but not as fast as he'd like. So he starts working with a guy called Alan Bennett, who is really high up in the order. Not that Alan Bennett.
Oh, okay.
This is way earlier. Every time I say that name, that's what I think too. He's not born yet. Don't worry about that. So this guy, Alan Bennett's super high up, but he's not doing very well financially. And you're not allowed to pay people for magical teachings. Right. Actually, that's one of the things the OTO guys said to us, isn't it? Yeah. We don't take money. We take money to cover our costs.
Right, but nothing like in addition to that.
Yeah. And that is Oh, I don't know. They said that, they had no moral code, but that does seem like a bit of a moral code. You don't take money for magic. Like, it's inappropriate.
I really respect that.
Yeah. So he can't pay him to train him. So what instead he says, come and live with me. And instead of rent, you can teach me magic. And this is a perfect arrangement for these guys. And Bennett basically introduces him to hardcore drugs. Because they're really helpful for doing the rituals. Like,
just drink coffee.
Can you imagine how much more, how much more of a rich experience we might have had if we'd been off our faces on heroin?
I mean, I was. Were you not?
So Bennett said there exists a drug whose use will open the gates of the world behind the veil of matter. It reminds me of a lot of what people are saying about ayahuasca now. And the main ritual that they're playing around with is something called the ritual of the Grisha.
Yeah, I hadn't heard of this.
Yeah, so the idea is to conjure 72 demons. They're the same 72 that was summoned by King Solomon in the Bible. And it's basically, it's drawn from, there's this tradition in Western occultism of people writing down all these weird, like they take the Bible and they change it a bit. And maybe we'll talk a bit about this. Maybe we should do an episode on Western occultism in general. Yeah. But and they're writing them down in what end up being called grimoires. Yeah. And they'll be passed down through the generations. You've got all these strange things that people have added to through the years, and no one's really sure where they originated. But this one, the ritual of the Grisha, comes from a grimoire they think is dated to about the mid-17th century, but might well be drawn from earlier text. The idea is that each of these 72 demons have symbols, like seals, they call them seals, that like they're controlled by, like if you show them this seal they have to respond, sort of thing. So you have to like open up all the seals and then the demons come through. I'll give you a bit of it. Okay, so this is the sort of thing you might hear them saying when they're doing the ritual of the Grisha. Thee I invoke, the bornless one, thee that didst create the earth and the heavens, thee that didst create the night and the day, thee that didst create the darkness and the light.
It's behind you!
Yeah, again, much more evocative when you're off your face.
Right, yeah.
So this is the sort of thing that him and Bennett are playing around with in their dark apartment with, like, walls painted black, chalk, weird sigils everywhere. This is a lot of my imagination. But you get that, waving swords around and stuff.
Amazing.
Really getting into it. Meanwhile, things were unraveling at the Golden Dawn.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, lots of people don't approve of Crowley's approach.
Yates.
Yeah, like Yates. Yeah, the drugs, the having sex with everyone. I mean, I imagine they're probably not that keen on the fact that he's having sex with men as well as their wives. So, yeah, they're kind of... And they don't like Mathers either, who's the guy who initiated Crowley, because he's getting a bit autocratic. Like, he wants things his way. So there's just a sort of split coming up.
And the Golden Dawn had its own issues. Who was it... Mathers who lost a load of their writing?
Yeah, he left them on a bus or something.
Yeah, cab. So things was... And they were a very private order. And this is something that ultimately, actually both Yates, but Crowley as well, fought against in the end.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah, the Yates versus Crowley thing is interesting because they're both poets.
And they've got so much in common in their work.
Yeah, they really should get on great. Yeah. They're both
personality-wise, completely different.
Yeah. So Yates specifically said that Crowley prostituted the great work and became a black magician. And Crowley objects to Yates because he deserted the great work for literature. So, yeah. And also there might be some romantic rivalry there too.
Wow.
Yeah, Crowley's always sleeping with people's wives, as previously mentioned. And a poetic rivalry. Crowley says Yates is jealous of him.
And Yates knew that Crowley's work was shit.
Well, I don't know. Yates, because at the time, this specific work that Crowley said that Yates was jealous of did get really good reviews.
And really bad reviews.
Yeah.
It's just controversial.
It is controversial, yeah. So maybe Yates was a bit jealous of him, but maybe not. Maybe that's just Crowley.
I think it would be like, somebody who kind of comes in and is like, yeah, guys, I can do it too. And it's like, this is what all artists are like. That they will kind of, they'll like some people, but then some people it's like, oh, they're just chances.
Yeah.
And that makes people annoyed. And I guess Crowley probably did seem like a bit of a chancer, even if people did like some of his work.
Yeah. Maybe I'll see if in my notes if I've got some poetry I can recite to you later, and then the listeners can judge for themselves. But it got pretty intense, this rivalry. So they were both accusing each other of working black magic against each other. Crowley said that his house was infested with weird and terrible figures that struck visitors senseless. You know, like people just walk into his house and see this creepy ghost thing and fall down.
Oh.
And he said, that's Yates. He's made all this. It's not me. He specifically said, this is not because of my ritual of the Grisha or anything like that. This is Yates. He's bewitched my house. And Yates said that Aleister Crowley made wax figures of the other members of the Golden Dawn, including him, and stuck pins in them.
That's so funny.
Yeah, I love
the,
it.
like the battle. It's
wizard
amazing.
battle. So Mathers, who is the guy who's still in charge technically, but a lot of people don't like him so much anymore, initiates Crowley into the Second Order. But by now, people aren't actually accepting Mathers' authority. So it's like, is he really in the Second Order? Because people don't really go with that, because it's really starting to properly split. So they attempt a coup. Crowley expects a magical attack, obviously. He's like, they're going to know we're going to do this, so I'm expecting a magical attack. And Mathers said, yeah, you should definitely be concerned about a magical attack, particularly fire. That's how they'll come after you. So Crowley's on his way up to London to take over, or to try and take over. And his carriage sets fire, his raincoat sets fire.
Get that.
And the hearth fire will not light in the place he's staying when he reaches London. It's like, oh, fire. This is a great example of, finding patterns. Like anything related to fire, he's going to write down in his... Also, I should point out that a lot of these anecdotes I'm telling about Crowley are just from Crowley, so we don't know how true they are.
Sure.
It's a good story anyway. So Mathers gives him this protective talisman that is red to ward off the magical attack, but it just drains of colour, so it's completely white.
Oh.
But he persists, as you would imagine. He forces his way into the headquarters of the Golden Dawn.
Yeah.
Dressed in full Highland dress,
Yeah.
with a black mask and a dagger, expels the secretary, who's very rude about. I won't even repeat what he says about her. He's very rude about her. He's very rude about a lot of women, and changes the locks. And
oh my God!
He's prepared to defend with any occult means necessary. He's like, I'm taking back the Golden Dawn. So the other guys turn up, and they just call the police.
Yeah.
So it's a bit of an anticlimax. There is no final wizard battle.
All right.
And they get their space back. And that's kind of more or less the end of his involvement with the Golden Dawn. I mean, he's still sort of playing around with the ideas, but he sort of changes his focus to doing rituals with his mates in his house. During this time, he's bought this manor on the side of Loch Ness. Actually, we talked about this with the OTO, didn't we?
Yeah.
Was it called Boleskine?
Boleskine, yeah.
It's the perfect house for doing a particular ritual.
The ritual of Abramilin.
That's right, which is to contact your HGA, your Holy Guardian Angel, if you're not keeping up with the acronyms.
And it's months you have to prepare for this.
It's really hard work, and you have to be doing the ritual every day. It's physically, you can't drink, and you can't do any drugs, and you can't have sex. Like, it's really hard, especially for someone like Crowley, difficult. So he gives it a go. He's bought the house for it specifically. He was just up there hiking, and then he saw this house, and he was like, "Oh, that's the house I can do this ritual on," because it had to be pointing in a certain direction, and it had to open onto a lake and all these specific things for it to work. So I guess if you've bought the house, you can at least give the ritual a go. But he can't do it. He just can't stick to it. And also, there's all the stuff going on with the Golden Dawn, like it's distracting him. I've heard this theory kicked around that because he didn't put all the toys back in the box after he started his rituals, that house is infested with demons.
And the Loch Ness.
And there's a famous monster in Loch Ness. Could that be Abraham himself?
Right.
Conjured out of Crowley's? I went to a museum in Inverness last time I was up there, and there are folk tales about there being monsters in that predate Crowley. But it's a nice little theory, isn't it? That the Loch Ness monster is actually one of Crowley's demons. So anyway, he doesn't get that off the ground, unfortunately. So he goes off travelling, as you would if you were a wealthy, independent means young man. Back in 1900, this is 1900 we've reached now. He goes to Mexico, where he messes around with the Freemasons a bit. He goes to India, where he learns about Raja Yoga, which is going to become a big part of what he does. So, go back to our yoga episode if you want to hear more about yoga, but in short, the specific type of yoga that he's messing around with is kind of like, it's not yoga like, you know, just putting your arms up and down and doing exercise like many people might think of yoga today. It is the classic divine union of soul and body. And he's really, really into pranayama, which is the breathing exercises. Probably because they make you feel a bit high, right? You've done those crazy breathing things, haven't you?
Yeah.
Like, I guess it's kind of like holotropic breathing as well. Another one of our previous episodes. Yeah. So obviously when you start restricting your breathing and breathing in weird different ways, stuff happens to your brain. You're getting different levels of oxygen in there and it makes you feel a bit weird. Perfect for doing the sort of rituals Crowley's interested in. I found an article somewhere where it was basically saying, because he wrote a book, I can't remember what it's called, but he wrote a book specifically about yoga, and the yoga community do not like this.
I'll bet.
Yeah. Basically, because he was like, he was saying you have to tolerate discomfort. That's the bit for him. This is what he took away from yoga. You have to deliberately put yourself in awkward, painful postures and conquer the impulse to move.
Sure.
Like get through it. But modern yoga people, as we talked about in the yoga episode, they really don't see yoga in this way. They see it more as like, I don't know, like comforting, empowering, like, and this is a blog that I was reading came from that perspective.
I feel like that is a really modern thing for it to be like purely comfortable. It's like, no, really back then it was about withstanding bodily discomfort.
Exactly. So, yeah. I mean, we talked about like that whole tradition coming out of the forests of India that are kind of like slightly crazy forest yoga, and that was, then you see the people who were putting, I mean, again, go back to the episode because I can't remember it off the top of my head, but like putting nails through themselves and doing it like the idea of conquering your body.
That's it, yeah.
And controlling your body is a big part. But yeah, a lot of modern yoga people do not like that. They, in fact, this blog not only said that she didn't like his approach to yoga, she said it was wrong, it was not yoga what he was doing, and sort of implied that maybe with all his messing around with yoga in this occult way that he had summoned up Nazism.
Oh. Well, that's an interesting theory.
Yeah. And it's really funny because it's like, I guess it's like everything Crowley touches, no one wants him to touch it. Like, don't touch my yoga, don't touch my Wicker, don't touch my whatever.
Because he does seem to be very, I mean, I wouldn't say powerful, but like just he affects things very strongly. Yeah.
So anyway, he's picking up the yoga stuff from India, and then he heads over to Paris, where he hung out with loads of famous artists. He wrote poetry about Rodin. He inspired Somerset Maugham's book, The Magician. Huh. That is Crowley. It's based on Crowley, The Magician. Who, unsurprisingly, Oliver Haddo is the character's name. He's a womanizing magician who ends up sacrificing his mistress to create life. Spoilers. Yeah. Anyway, I haven't read it. Sounds great. I will probably put it on my reading list.
Now, none of you have to read it.
Yeah. So my point is that he's mixing in just really eclectic circles. He's mixing with incredibly rich people, like of his own social class, but then he's mixing with the down-and-out artists, and he's also mixing with people from all different cultures, mystics, and he's pulling this all together into what will eventually become Thelema, I suppose.
Yeah.
So, at some point, he comes back to Scotland, to Boleskine, and he meets up with an old friend, Gerald Kelly, and he has a sister, which is the start of like any Crowley anecdote. It's like, this guy had a sister. This guy, so she's in a bit of a pickle. She is having an affair with a married man, and her family want her to marry this other dude. She doesn't want to marry the other dude, and she can't marry the guy she actually wants to marry. So the story goes that her and Crowley are alone, and she just like breaks down and is like, oh, I don't know what to do. I'm in this situation. Oh, it's a nightmare. And he says, I'll help you out. I'll marry you. And then you can go and have sex with whoever you like. I don't care.
Oh, yeah.
But then you'll be free because you'll be technically married and your family will stop bothering you about the situation.
Sweet.
So they elope. And I just think this is a really gentlemanly and cool thing to do. Like he
saved her.
Yeah, exactly. He did. He saved her. So they elope. His friend Gerald Kelly is not very happy about it because you wouldn't be very happy about your sister marrying Aleister Crowley, I guess. He married her in 1903. And after marriage, during their honeymoon and, you know, the weeks and months following, they ended up falling in love.
That's sweet.
Unsurprisingly, of course, if you know anything about Aleister Crowley, he took Rose to Egypt for their honeymoon, which is where the sort of story of Thelema really kicks off, doesn't it?
It does, yeah. So they arrive in Egypt. I believe that they claim to be prince and princess, which I think is amazing.
Of course they did. I bet they had the outfits as well.
And I've heard different stories about this, but I thought they'd rented like a pyramid. You know, like they'd gone into a pyramid. Yes,
that's what I read too. I read that they had access to the Great Pyramid of Giza. I think it just would have been way different in those days. Like maybe if you were a rich white person who came over to Egypt
and claiming to be a prince and princess.
Yeah. So that's, I've been to Giza and I didn't even go inside because you had to pay extra to go inside. But they're empty. Inside the pyramids, it's all empty. It's all been taken out and put in the museum. So I thought it wasn't worth it. If I went back, I would probably go inside.
Good.
But I was on a budget then. So I just looked from the outside. The idea that you could just have it completely to yourself is crazy because there's so many people there.
Right.
Like, it's a big tourist thing and there are people everywhere. But to be alone there must be amazing.
It must be hard. Yes, it's hard for us to imagine very few people being there, but I guess it was more unusual anyway. So Crowley quickly began invoking ancient Egyptian deities. Well,
as she would,
yeah. He was also studying Islamic mysticism and Arabic. Again, like really pulling from diverse sources. Like I said, he's really the ultimate Renaissance man. Rose, his lovely bride, would kind of go into these wacky states from time to time, where she would tell Crowley things that she couldn't possibly know, like this particular god is over here. You know, she would show Crowley statues filled with all this symbolism that was meaningful to Crowley, like the number 666. You know, tell him things like Horus, the Egyptian deity, was trying to communicate with him.
Some of this sounds a bit like he's just underestimating his wife. Like, she couldn't possibly know about Horus. It's like, well, she can read, dude.
Yeah, exactly. And also, I just imagine her like trying to please him, like just trying to. She had nothing to do either. Like, like you said, she was probably picking up stuff too. And I don't know. Who knows? Maybe she really was channeling things. And then on April the 8th, which I believe is somebody's birthday.
It's my birthday. It's also the Buddha's birthday.
Oh my God, amazing.
In Japan, anyway.
So this is when Crowley claimed to have heard Aiwass for the first time. And he wrote everything he heard down into a book that is the Book of the Law, or Libra al Legis. I'm saying that right? I'm just going to call it the Book of the Law.
Yeah.
So Aiwass is basically his holy guardian angel.
Yeah.
It's a voice. It's a spirit. It's, you know, who knows what Aiwass is.
I was thinking about this because the description of how he meets Aiwass is, like you say, Rose is channeling stuff or just saying random shit, depending on which way you take it. And she says there's this Aiwass character. I don't know if she calls him by that name, but she's like, there's a presence that wants to speak to you. He wants to speak to you for 3 days. So first day, April the 8th. Every afternoon, you have to go into the temple at this specific time, and you have to face the wall, and then Aiwass is going to appear and tell you stuff. And Crowley describes, like, there's a voice, and it's coming from the left behind him, saying the stuff, and I'm like, I mean, this is a long shot, but could it be that Rose has just paid a dude to go and say things? Like, I mean, it's possible, right?
I'd love to have been a fly on the wall.
That would be amazing. There's absolutely no way to know what it is. Like, it could have just been a voice in his head.
Yeah. That could have been Aiwass.
But wouldn't that be amazing if she just like got some dude on the streets of Egypt?
Yeah.
Like, would you mind popping in and saying stuff to my mad husband?
So the book that was produced over those 3 days basically proclaims that humanity was entering a new aeon. Eon? What do you say? Aeon,
I don't know. Aeon, maybe.
Aeon. And that Crowley would serve as its prophet. And it states that a supreme moral law was to be introduced in this aeon, which is do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. And that people should learn to live and tune into their will. So this is also, I guess, where Thelema gets born. And just to kind of elaborate a bit on Thelema. So it's like I said, it comes kind of all from that book, but I believe it gets developed, you know, in Crowley's lifetime. And it kind of pulls in so much of these things that Crowley was learning from ancient, like Hermeticism, alchemy, Buddhism, Judaism, Hinduism, you name it. He was into it all, and it all gets pulled in. And one really big influence, which people have pointed to, is Francois Rabelais, who is a 16th century Franciscan and then later Benedictine monk, who actually used that word theleme, which that's the French form of the word, and he used that in his like fictional. That was the name of his fictional abbey in his novels.
The Abbey of Thelema, yeah, which is what Crowley later goes on to actually create his own Abbey of Thelema, which we'll talk about towards the end of his life.
And the only rule in this abbey was fais ce que tu veux, or do what thou wilt.
Oh, so he didn't even make up those words.
No.
Wow.
And like you mentioned earlier, it does come from a Greek word, which could be translated to will, to wish, to want, or purpose. And the other kind of core idea, other than, do what thou wilt, is that every man and woman is a star.
Oh, and the OTO people said this several times in our conversation with them.
Yeah. This is something that I've never really... I mean, it's a metaphor. Some people say that it's a metaphor for our calling, or our will, in that they're all unique, like stars in the sky. I kind of get a bit confused when we start talking about being stars. I don't know why.
I was thinking, because the Body Master said about how it was a really eloquent way of putting it. He was like, at school they tell you that you're not the center of the universe,
but you are.
But in a way, you are the center of your universe because it's your perspective. And I was like, the sun is the center of our galaxy, and the sun is a star. So every man and woman is a star, as in we're all the center of our own galaxy, and the rays of light coming out of us are like our perspective. That's how I interpreted it. Yeah,
it's an interesting way of imagining the world. And this is kind of what I've heard about. This is what I've heard from other Thelemites, that the whole... Because I don't want to call it a religion. I guess
practice.
It's like a belief system, practice, whatever. It's a way of understanding the universe.
Yeah.
And that's why I think it can wrap around all of these other belief systems. The other big thing is, like we said, Thelema is not about doing whatever you want. I think it's more to do with taking your freedom and kind of finding your true self, your core divinity, your focus, your direction, your purpose.
With the help of your HDA.
Right.
When we were reading about the HDA, I was thinking, because to me this is just such a bizarre concept, that like I only know angels as in like cartoon angels, but being brought up Catholic, did you have an idea of what a guardian angel was? Was that a thing for you?
It completely was. And again, this is all kind of coming up for me recently when I was researching what the daimon is. And it's something that my mum would tell me, like when I went to bed at night, little kid, like, if I was worried about something, it's like, don't worry, pray to your guardian angel. It will look out for you. Incredibly comforting. Like if I was to say that, that there is one comforting thing as a child, like it was definitely that. And I didn't really think too much about it. I just assumed that it was just a thing. And I even more recently, when I was thinking about this again, I kind of just thought that was in all of Christianity. I thought everyone had the belief of holy guardian angels, but it's actually a Catholic thing. Yeah,
so it definitely wouldn't have been Crowley's upbringing.
No.
That is exactly the sort of popish or pagan thing that his, exclusive brethren upbringing we've rejected.
Yeah.
I gave it a bit of a Google just because I literally had no idea what it was like to have a guardian angel.
You've got to experience it.
This is not just like old school Catholicism. As Kat said, she had it when she was growing up. And the Pope Francis, made a speech about it like a couple of years ago, maybe even last year. He said, Christians have guardian angels to encourage and guide them so they won't become sluggish on their journey in life. Without the guidance of angels, men and women who become settled in their ways and put their life on hold are in danger of becoming like stagnant water.
That's brilliant.
Yeah.
Like, so good.
Isn't that interesting?
I'm adopting this as a new belief. I'm taking this one on.
It's just so weird because everyone thinks of Crowley as like a satanic character.
Right.
And we'll talk a bit maybe about like the difference between Thelema and Satanism. But
it's very interesting that sweet idea is actually very completely at the core.
Yeah.
So, and the other thing, just in kind of defense of the whole thing, is they have these 11 principles of Thelemites, which just some of them, like I know that every single other being also has the same right and purpose to explore and express their natures. In that way, it's just very like letting other people get on with their own thing, which I think is generally a good way to be. I'm always growing and always searching and striving ever to be or do more in all things. And so it's a lot of like personal development stuff. I enjoy the beauty in everyone and everything else, and I help to bring more beauty into the world. This big emphasis on beauty. There are lots. There are 11. We'll put it in the show notes. It's really, I think they're all pretty solid. Deities, right? So this makes it kind of become a bit more religious, I guess, in that way. But there are these pantheon of Thelemic deities, but there is a cool trio. The highest being the goddess Nuit. And she's basically the night sky. And she's the great mother, the ultimate source of all things. Really interesting that their number one person
is a woman.
Yeah. The second principal deity is the god Hadit, which is conceived as an infinitely small point, as the complement and consort of Nuit. And he's kind of symbolizing manifestation, motion, and time, which is, I mean, that sounds kind of different from, it's not just the moon and the sun, you know, like, they feel
it's a much more abstract.
Certainly, yeah. I don't know if they do get more concrete, but it's in the overall concept, it's very like just symbolic. And the third deity is Ra-Hor-Quit, which is the manifestation of Horus. So this is, I guess,
this is the guy whose hat we're wearing.
Yeah. And so he's symbolized as a throned man with the head of a hawk who carries a wand. And he's actually the one who's associated with the sun and the active energies of Thelemic magic.
And are all these like reinterpretations of ancient Egyptian? Because these sound like ancient Egyptian names to me.
Yes, and I can't remember a lot of my ancient Egyptian mythology so well. I just recognise obviously Horus, but I think they all have correspondences to the ancient Egyptian gods as well.
But Iwas wasn't an ancient Egyptian god.
No,
he was like a whole new thing. I guess because he is Crowley's personal thing.
Exactly.
And it's really interesting. Sorry to go back round to it, but this fascinates me. Like, what exactly was Iwas? One of the things that he said, it's similar to what he said about Rose, is that it couldn't be just me making it up, because Iwas knew things I couldn't possibly know. He had superior knowledge of the Kabbalah, which would be very impressive because Crowley was quite knowledgeable in the Kabbalah, and he left numerical puzzles in the text. Like if you added up the first, I don't know exactly what, but just imagine if you added up the first letter of every third thing, then you'd get secret messages. So Crowley was like, oh, I couldn't have made this up because there's all this stuff about it. And Iwas, specifically the name, he because he's so interested in numbers and numerology, he decided that it must be AIVAS, which adds up to 78, giving each of those numbers and giving each of those letters a number. I don't know how numerology works, but 78 is the numerological equivalent of Ivas, which is the number of Mesler, which is obviously the influence from the highest unity, and therefore suitable enough as the title, as a message, for a messenger of him. But then he was like, still not quite happy with this. 78 doesn't seem quite right. So he asked a friend for the Hebrew spelling, gave him Ovis, O-I-V-Z, which equates to 93. 93 being super important to Thelema, because the number of the word Thelema is 93, and the number of agape, which is love, in the love is the law, love under will part of their whole mantra, is also 93. So it's like, perfect. It must be that. It must be the Hebrew version. So, but he was still a bit confused about it all, because the name that he was given in the Book of the Law was Iwas, A-I-W-A-S-S. So that should really
It's almost like the Ivas or Ovis kind of translated it for him. It's like, oh, you're English, so I'll give you the English spelling. Don't worry about the other one.
No, the whole numerology thing is just fascinating.
Yeah.
But it's such a good example of that way that we can find patterns in everything.
God, it really is.
So, of course, I wanted to do the numerology of our names.
Oh!
I did mine. It wasn't that interesting. But, so what I did is I did exactly how Crowley did it. I did my name. I did my name without my middle name, with my maiden name, with just my initials. I did all the different combinations. Didn't come up with anything interesting, but I could have continued. I didn't try in Hebrew. But it was very simple with yours. So I tried Cat Rose Nelligan, your full name. Nothing good there. I tried Catherine, nothing good. But then I just tried Cat Rose, which is 3 + 1 + 2 + 9 + 6 + 1 + 5 equals 27. 27 plus... No, 2 + 7 equals 9. 9, that's the first number of 93. We're halfway there. So then I worked out your soul number, which you do by just adding the numbers of the vowels in the name A, O, and E. So that's just 1 + 6 + 5 = 12. 1 + 2 = 3. That's 9, 3, 93.
Rebecca, I'm so happy. Thank you for that gift.
I would have, if I hadn't got in English, I would have worked through Hebrew
right.
until I eventually got to the number
it.
that I wanted, and that's how these things work.
That's how they work. That's really fun. No, it is really interesting that with the whole idea that there is this thing that knows what you can't know. When I was researching the daimon, I think it's like linked a lot to like creative flow. Like, you know, when you're doing something and you kind of feel like you receive an idea.
Mm.
And I think it's just really tied in with a lot of experiences that like artists have when you feel like that idea didn't come from you.
Yeah.
This is kind of what I think he's kind of talking about.
Yeah, I think
like,
so too.
It's quite a common experience, or at least for me, it's what I shoot for. Like, that's the best feeling, is when you feel like you've received a creative idea. And we were talking yesterday and you kind of like had that moment, and like we see this all the time, but so it's up to you whether you want to ascribe that to your own mind or this other entity's.
Yeah.
Anyway, and yeah, so just the last thing I'll say about Thelema is actually when it comes, this is more to do with the OTO, but there are some ethics as well, which I think is kind of interesting, because again, this isn't just a free-for-all. So first one is your duty to yourself, which again is you as the center of your universe, and you kind of have the duty to learn about yourself. Second one is your duty to others, which is to actually abolish separateness from others, to fight when necessary, but to avoid interfering with the wills of others, to enlighten others when needed. So again, like we talked about with the other OTO members, like you don't assert what you know on other people. You don't give advice unless it's
asked for, yeah.
And to worship the divine nature in all other beings. Pretty nice. Next one is your duty to mankind. So this states that the laws of the land, should be respected. A crime is described as being a violation of your true will.
Oh.
Again, so that, and we were talking about this at the pub. We respect the laws of whatever land you're in.
Yeah.
You know, we're not going to be breaking English laws. Because
although we didn't ask them, because it seemed a bit rude to ask, but I would imagine that there are quite a lot of Thelemites who take a lot of drugs that are against the law.
Oh.
Don't you think?
Yeah.
I don't think they're all like, oh no, I couldn't possibly smoke marijuana. It's against the law. That doesn't sound like them.
They don't abide by all laws, but who does? And finally, your duty to all other beings and things states that the law of Thelema should be applied to all problems and used to decide every ethical question. It's a violation of the law to use any animal or object for the purpose of which it is unfit, or to ruin things so that they are useless for their purpose. So there's a lot of, like, I guess, intention with like everything you do. People aren't just slaughtering goats for shits and giggles.
Although they did ask me, they asked you, didn't they? Are either of you vegetarian or vegan?
I don't know why that question was asked. Yeah, very interesting. Very interesting indeed. Natural resources can be used by man, but this should not be done wantonly. You know, you shouldn't just take the piss. I really like all that, basically.
It does seem like their basic sort of tenets match how I live my life and what I think is a good idea. Right.
So I've spoken enough about that, but I just want to get back into Crowley's life, which he becomes a dad, 1905. Rose gives birth to their daughter Lilith, which, I mean, you know the story of Lilith.
Yeah, the first woman. I'm obsessed. Well, I was obsessed with Lilith. This was like a big thing for me when I was a teenager. So it's like in the Apocrypha. So it's bits that are left out of the Bible. That's what the Apocrypha means. And the idea is that before God created Eve, he created Adam, a wife, but out of the same stuff he made Adam out of. So just out of soil or whatever it was, clay, or I don't know, whatever it was, same stuff. The problem was, obviously, being made out of the same stuff, she thought she deserved the same rights and dignity and so forth. Yeah. So there was conflict. Specifically, the conflict was she wanted to be on top when they were having sex. Adam was like, no, this is no good. I don't know why you made me this terrible wife. And God was like, yeah, good point. She is terrible. So they exiled her to some cliffs, Mount Sinai, somewhere around there. and Sinai, I don't know. But anyway, they exiled her. This is all just off the top of my head. I might be getting many details wrong. I mean, it is apocrypha, so who cares? Really, it's just a myth. Anyway, so she's at the cliffs, she's consorting with demons, and to teach her a proper good lesson, God says, okay, fine, you're going to keep on giving birth. You're going to be like constantly pregnant and giving birth, but all the babies are going to die. Imagine that. It's horrific. All for wanting the same rights as a man. So yeah, she's out there, and obviously that fucks her up psychologically, as you would imagine. So her thing is that she likes to come in and kill human babies to like get revenge, because if you think of all humans as descended from Adam and Eve, then kind of all babies are like her ex-husband's babies in a weird way. So there's lots of like, I think this is in the Kabbalah as well, there's lots of like sigils that people will put on their crib of their baby to ward off Lilith, right? Because she might come.
So he was kind of fucking asking for it when he calls his...
Yeah, it's a dark thing to call your daughter, for sure. And it's also kind of a name that's come to mean like it's a sexual thing, isn't it? Like Lilith is a sexy, dangerous woman, not a cute little baby. I don't, in my head anyway.
Sure it is. So anyway, like any good father does, he used these early years of his daughter's life to go climb Mount Kanchenjunga in the Himalayas, right? Yeah, so he bailed on them, and it was kind of a disaster. He basically spent most of the time arguing with his team, who thought that he was reckless, and they eventually mutinied against him. Because I guess he probably thought, it's my way or the highway. It's
I'm sure.
To us my will.
To us my will.
And his team, at one point, I think it gets very stormy, the weather gets really bad. The team starts heading back down the mountain as nightfall approached, despite Crowley's warnings that it was too dangerous. Subsequently, some of the team gets killed in an accident, something which Crowley was then blamed for because he kind of stayed safe at camp. And that basically ended his climbing career. Really sad.
Yeah, again, it's like, it's interesting because we hear all these stories from Crowley's perspective. So it's like, I told them not to go down there. I was being very sensible, just sitting in my tent. I don't know why they were so angry with me.
Right.
But again, I'm pretty sure I can guess. There were some stories about him hitting porters, like he wouldn't do what he wanted. In fact, generally, a lot of his travel, there's sprinkled with anecdotes of him, like, just, like, physically assaulting.
Yeah, in every way.
Yeah, like, people who won't do what he wants.
Yeah. So then his relationship with Rose is kind of getting strained here. He does go back to meet up with his wife in Calcutta, and they decide to tour southern China. I find it really hard to just imagine this, man and wife and the little kid are just like traveling around. Crowley gets into opium.
As you do.
And yeah, you're in China after all. And he continues to travel on while his wife and kid go back to Europe. At some point, I couldn't work out when, you probably know, but Lilith does die of typhoid, which Crowley blamed Rose for letting happen. Because I think Crowley said that Rose was an alcoholic.
Yeah, I think she was. She was eventually...
Can you blame her at this point?
Yeah, exactly. She was eventually actually went to some kind of like asylum/rehab because she was in such a state. I think like Lilith was 2 when she died. She was very young, maybe even younger. So basically an infant.
Yeah. Which
must have reminded Crowley, there's something I didn't mention about his early childhood, is he had a baby sister who died very young. And there's this weirdness about it. Although he was young at the time too. So, children deal with grief weirdly. But I can't remember exactly how he put it, but his parents were like, oh, come and see your dead sister. Like, come and see the dead body of your sister. And he was like, I don't know why you're wasting my time by showing me this. This is nothing to me. And then just sort of wandered off. So like it emotionally shut down.
Right.
But then, as I say, kids are weird about it. Maybe he didn't even really understand what death was. But then having a baby die, his own child die, it's like, it's a weird mirroring.
Completely. Rose does have another child in 1907, Lola Zaza. Slightly better name.
Slightly better.
It's pushing it. On the upside, Crowley is still making contact with Awas, who dictated 2 further texts to him.
I love this. On the upside, he's still communicating with a discarnate entity, so it's not all bad.
In the grand scheme of things. And so Liber 7 and Liber Cordis Sinti Serpente. I'm sure my pronunciation is perfect there. Both of which were later classified in the corpus of the Holy Books of Thelema. Do you have anything to say about...
I noticed you're sort of craftily skipping over any mention of sex magic.
Am I meant to be mentioning sex magic at this point?
Well, I don't know. This is what he's up to at this time. And this is what he's experimenting. I mean, he's been experimenting with it all the time, but this is when he's like slotting it into his ideas about Thelema. We didn't talk about sex magic with the OTO, and
Rebecca was just dying.
I was dying to, obviously.
I'm here talking about angels, and
I get the impression that if they do it, then
it's high order stuff, isn't it?
Yeah, it'll be high order, and it will be very respectful and like not weird like what Crowley was doing. I mean, who knows?
You never know.
But from my reading of them, I don't think they're into some of the weirdest stuff. Like the whole idea of sex magic is coming from Tantra, which he finds about in India earlier on, like this whole idea. Because I mean, it's not crazy to think sexual attraction is a very powerful thing. And it does feel almost like
magical.
Yeah, because where does it come from? And suddenly you're drawn to this person, and people talk about, animal magnetism, which is a whole different episode, because there was a guy who had crazy theories about that. But that being drawn to someone feels almost supernatural in how intense it is, and you can't resist it. So it's unsurprising that people have started to think about magic and sex together. I found an article on this great website, actually. If anyone's interested in Thelema, I would recommend checking out thelemic.union.com. So this is the author of this blog quoting from Magica Sexualis, which is a book by Hugh Urban. It's like an academic text about sex magic. He said, because sexual attraction is the most fundamental force in nature, the experience of orgasm is the critical moment in human consciousness and the key to magical power. As the moment when new life is infused from the spiritual realm into the material, it is the crucial moment when the soul is opened up to the spiritual energies. As such, the experience of sexual climax has the potential to lead the soul or upwards or downwards to higher states of spiritual transcendence or to lower states of corruption. Right. So, if you believe in souls, as many people still do, despite my best efforts, then that's when, I guess, conception is when the soul goes into the sperm and the egg. Like the sperm and the egg are coming together, but also the soul's going in there as well. So, of course, that's a magical moment, right? And Crowley talks about, he all over his work is constant sex jokes and puns and stuff. It's amazing. I love it. But he talks about murdering thousands of children daily because he's talking about wanking.
Right, yeah, exactly.
And those are potential children. Yeah, so basically, sex is working in many different ways when people are doing sex magic. It's the classic altered states thing. So you're kind of going into a trance because you're putting yourself through all this physical exertion and it's an intense physical experience. That makes sense. And then there's the idea of polarity, which is actually a really big deal in Wicker. Like the tension between male and female, between black and white, between opposites, basically.
And Tantra as well.
The frisson between opposites. And that you can actually feel that frisson in the context of sex because that's what they conceptualize sexual tension as. I don't know entirely how he thinks about that in context of homosexuality. Probably there'd just be a different opposite. So instead of it being male-woman, it would be giver and taker.
Yeah, and like that it has its own place in its own way.
Yeah. I mean, he certainly would have made put it because he was really into that. Yeah. And then the third bit, I think, that comes into the whole sex magic thing is transgression. And so disgust is obviously a very powerful emotion, and a lot of like very, very low down in our, I don't know if this is a correct way to refer to it, but like lizard brain is a very, very ancient part of our brains, the disgust reaction. So a lot of his like sex stuff is kind of gross. It's interesting. I read somewhere that when you're sexually aroused, your disgust tolerance goes up. You're less likely to be grossed out when you're having sex, which makes sense because you've got your face right next to someone's butt. Maybe I mean how I do it. so you need to. Yeah. Anyway, but that idea of violating taboos, right? Transgression, stimulating a bit of disgust, like a bit of salt to go with the sweet, as you said this morning when I served you the porridge. Anyway, so it's a powerful cocktail. Yeah. And this means basically that sexual fluids are very, very sacred to anyone who practices sex magic, which explains the cake of light, which is.
Oh, wait, I'm not sure if I'm going to get the ingredients right, but a cake of light involves cum. And what else? Like period blood?
Yeah, so I think it's basically like a normal biscuit, like a wafer, so it'll be flour and water and margarine or however you make those.
Honey.
Honey, maybe. Yeah, maybe that's why they asked if we were vegan. And And then you need some kind of something from a human. So you don't have to have cum and menstrual blood. Okay. That's overkill. I mean, you do it however, do as thou wilt.
It's my favourite.
Yeah. But generally it's just menstrual blood. But sometimes it can be semen. But it's a bodily fluid is the really important thing. And it is like it's a Eucharist. So again, it's interesting that we didn't find, I guess maybe this is coming through the Golden Dawn though, because I couldn't find, just reading through his biography, anything about Catholicism, but so much is inspired by Catholicism. Yeah. Maybe it's just around in the air. The point is, it's something that becomes God. And that's the point of the Eucharist,
it has like
right?
the essence of spirit in it.
And I think Catholics often think of this as like, I mean, what do your family think? Does the wine become the blood of Christ?
I mean, my parents, if you grilled them, they would be like, no,
it's just a metaphor.
Really. It's like a metaphor. I think that's the whole. Okay, I could be wrong. Catholics, please write in. I know that there are millions of you watching.
Millions Catholic listeners.
I think it's all very metaphorical. I don't think anyone really. It's both. It's like this is. It's the weird world of like. It's true with a weird. It's a weird kind of truth.
Yeah,
you know, and. But it's clearly not like the same thing. I mean, we talked a bit about this with the Hare Krishna episode. It's kind of like, is it like literally? But what do you even mean by literal at this point? It's kind of it just becomes something more than like if you were to cut off your finger and it's like, well, this is the body of Rebecca. It's not that literal.
Yeah.
But it's more than imagination, maybe.
It's in a like middle zone. And this is exactly the kind of middle zone that all of Crowley's work is playing with. Like you never know whether he's being literal or metaphorical or what's going on.
Yeah, completely.
But anyway, so this is their Eucharist. And I think it was maybe in the Shoemaker Book, but maybe elsewhere. They say that Crowley recommended this to be a daily thing.
Wow.
To take Eucharist daily. You don't have to like... I mean...
How was he getting all these women?
Exactly. How are you getting all the menstrual blood? Well, luckily, you can do it homeopathically. So you just need to... So what they do is they make like one biscuit with a decent quantity of menstrual blood in it. And then they'll cook that, burn that, mash it up into tiny crumbs.
Oh my God.
And then put like all the crumbs into another batch and then so on and so on. So the chance of you actually getting any menstrual blood... I mean, you're out of luck. It's probably going to be like... I say, rip off. If you're going to put blood in there, put blood in there.
This is some really pure stuff. It's 10%.
It's hardcore. What it says in the Book of the Law is the best blood is of the moon, monthly, then the fresh blood of a child, or dropping from the host of heaven, then of enemies, then of the priest or the worshippers, last of some beast, no matter what.
I've got so many questions already. Dropping from heaven?
Dropping from heaven. Yeah, I don't know. Dropping from the host of heaven. Oh, no, that means come.
Oh, yes.
If you don't know, like, this is a good rule of thumb when you're reading Crowley. If something is obscure, it probably means come.
Sounds about right. Let's talk about the infant thing. I don't think he actually means, I thought that was also like...
Yeah, I don't know whether he's just saying that to be a bit...
From what I've learned is that he does deliberately... obscure things, and that's to stop really dumb literal people who are kind of being like, okay, yeah, I'm just gonna go kill a kid. Like he's kind of deliberately trying to put people off.
Yeah. I think he also revels in the fact that people think he's evil. Like he clearly enjoys that, and that's like his look. So
likes to titillate people, as it were.
But yeah, the Book of the Law can be interpreted many ways. So my interpretation is not definitive at all, as I'm sure the OTO would point out. And in fact, we shouldn't be even talking about interpreting it, because now I've coloured your understanding of that passage.
Thanks for that. That's some will I'll never get back. Anything else on sex magic?
No, I mean, my point is, like, it's funny to talk about it, obviously, and it seems silly to us, maybe, but I don't think it's that silly. No, like, it's no sillier than any other religious
Definitely
thing.
Not. And I think, certainly, if you do start looking at the kind of old Tantra stuff, there's some really interesting stuff there.
Yeah. In fact, sorry, there is one more thing about sex magic. When I was looking into this, because, you know, like, a big Tantra thing is to retain your sexual fluids if you're a man, so just to resist coming. And then save it all up for one big cum, I guess. I don't know. So I was like, that's a weird thing that Tantra people do. But it's not just a weird thing that Tantra people do. There's a whole like modern movement.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I didn't write down the name of it, but there's like a whole thing. There are YouTube videos of guys giving tips on how to best retain your semen. Because if you believe that there is something magical about semen, then obviously you want to keep it all to yourself. And there's like a modern. It would be a great thing to do an episode on. We need a male guest host.
Yeah. I think you know someone.
I do know some men, that's true. But I don't know if I know any who are willing to retain their semen for the sake of podcasting.
But yeah, that would actually be a really great episode. Maybe we can have some volunteers if anyone wants to be...
Joe, please don't invite that. Please don't invite that.
So I think we should move on. And, okay, so at this point, inheritance is now running out. Crowley needs to make some cash. So this is when he starts taking in paying students, because I guess at this point he's kind of forgetting that thing about you're not meant to be...
Well, that was a Golden Dawn
That
thing.
is a Golden
He's out on his own
whatever.
now.
And so he's instructing these students in occult and magical practice. This is when he meets Victor Newberg in 1907, who became his sexual partner and closest disciple. And in 1908, they toured northern Spain before heading to Morocco. And they had a pretty fucked up relationship, to say the least.
Surprise, surprise.
Yeah, I think Crowley really, I don't want to say abused, because I don't even think that's the right word, but just put Victor through a lot of things, both mentally and physically and spiritually.
Yeah, it always seems like a sort of a permanent BDSM thing. Like he was a sub and he did what Crowley said, and like maybe he enjoyed it. I mean, like, I don't know. Like, it's very... Like everything, like when you read about Crowley, you only ever get Crowley's perspective, so you don't know what the other people were thinking. But I'm sure there must have been times where Victor was like, what the fuck am I doing with this guy?
Well, I mean, Victor, I think, came to a very bad end. I think he ended up kind of going crazy.
Oh, that must have been after I stopped reading that biography.
Yeah. Again, I'm not going to go into any details because this is already going on long, but that story in itself was one of the things that I kind of put a black mark against Crowley's name.
Oh, you've got a tally,
I've got one, yeah, and that's
the
one
pros
of the
and
few
cons.
things. Yeah. Anyway, he also, 1907 was a big year. He founds AA then, not Alcoholics Anonymous.
Oh, that would be amazing.
Well, every time you read it, and I think there's a differentiation. When you see AA written down, you'll see these like 3 little dots in a triangle next to each A, like the therefore symbol, shorthand therefore. So, and this is also when the Golden Dawn has gotten sick of him. He's taking matters into his own hands. The AA is incredibly and notoriously hard to pin down. No one can even agree on what it stands for. Some people have ideas. It's like these are all theoretical, such as Arcanum Arcanorum, which is the secret of secrets, or Argentium Astrum, Silver Star, and so on. So, and there are many more. And in terms of what goes on inside it, as far as I know, their teachings are very much like the Golden Dawn, because I think at this point he hasn't done completely his own thing yet, but again, taking from Buddhism, Vedanta, Kabbalah, all the things. And your aim as a member is really just to move up in the grades, and these are based on the Kabbalistic tree of life, and gain knowledge and conversation with the HGA. And this is when he kind of introduces the idea of, never accepting payment for initiation or other services. He divorces Rose in 1909 and takes this little sex slave to Algeria.
Oh, this is Victor.
Yeah.
Yeah, I read something about them dragging Victor into the desert.
Yeah, he's touring the desert, and I guess there was some, like a dog on a leash.
Yeah, naked and in chains.
Yeah.
Is how I remember it.
I don't even know if that's even true, but I've heard that enough to be like, oh, I just assume that's what happened. But who knows if
he
it was that
quite
extreme.
into that, Christ in the wilderness thing, because that comes up later in his life as well.
I don't know what that is.
40 Days and 40 Nights.
Oh, all right.
Yeah.
Jeez, I'm being a really bad Christian today. And so Crowley is reciting the Quran on a daily basis, which, again, he's really doing all of the things. It just amazes me. It's also on this trip that Crowley performed an invocation ritual to the demon Chorazon, which is apparently a watershed moment in his magical career. I mean, these demons are kind of meaningless, at least to me. I mean, are you familiar with Chorazon?
I've never heard of Chorazon.
Sounds like Charizard, but yeah. And they returned to London in January of 1910. And this is when Crowley found that Mathers was suing him for publishing the secrets of the Golden Dawn.
Oh, is that because he was writing about the AA and it was just basically a rip-off of the Golden Dawn?
Right.
Or from Mather's perspective.
And actually Crowley had this document called, publication called The Equinox. It was just like a kind of magazine, like a zine. And that's where he was publishing all of this stuff, which is something that this goes on my like plus tally, because I like that he was sharing this stuff.
Yeah.
He didn't have permission to do it. What a dick. But and the court found in favour of Crowley.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. I guess he probably did some magic. And he used this to his benefit because the case was widely reported in the press. And as we know, Crowley, the Leo, enjoyed attention and played up to this sensationalist stereotype of being a Satanist and an advocate of human sacrifice, despite being, well, probably neither.
Yeah.
And then in early 1912, so this is when the OTO starts to form, Crowley publishes the Book of Lies, and he gets in trouble with German occultist Theodor Reuss, who accused him of publishing some of the secrets of his own occult order, the Ordo Templi Orientis. That's the OTO. The original OTO, like we said earlier, was not Crowley. It was from these, like, a few Germans.
Yeah, the body master said it was just four German guys.
But I love this story because rather than them being like all competitive, like you can imagine a Golden Dawn person being like, what, stop ripping off our stuff. Crowley convinced Reuss that the similarities were just a coincidence, and they actually became friends, which I love. And Reuss appointed Crowley as the head of the OTO's British branch, the Mysterium Mystica Maxima, MMM. And at a ceremony in Berlin, Crowley adopted the magical name of Baphomet and was proclaimed Supreme Rex and Sovereign Grand Master General of Ireland, Iona, and all the Britons. How cool is that?
Wow, yeah.
I want some titles, Rebecca. Let's get some titles going on.
And you can't be pissed that people compare him to a Satanist, because Baphomet is the Satanist symbol,
Right,
isn't it?
he's
Like
just going for it.
That's the whole thing.
So Crowley then set about advertising the MMM, and he is like really good at advertising things. He's just good at getting press and all the things. He's rewriting many of the existing OTO rituals, which were then mostly based on Freemasonry. I mean, a lot of this stuff is based on Freemasonry.
Yeah.
And now he's kind of incorporating his own Thelemite elements. And this is kind of controversial within the group, but I guess if there are only a few of them, it doesn't matter. And actually, the sex magic thing, as far as I know, I don't know if you came across this, but it kind of did come from the OTO.
Sorry.
It did come from OTO. They had an emphasis on sex magic as well, and he really was obviously drawn to that. So he's basically incorporating a lot of magical working based on anal sex and incorporating it into the syllabus of the OTO members who are higher up in the order.
Although who knows if they're still doing that today?
Who knows? Well, there's only one way to find out.
Yeah.
So
climb those ranks.
What happens next, Rebecca?
So he's romping around in the occult, basically. He's making a name for himself. But the name isn't so good. Like, as you said, like, people started to think of him as a bit of a Satanist. There's being bad stuff written about him. Even amongst his friends, he's not super popular because of the habit of fucking other people's wives and husbands. So he's in a weird situation where he's well known, but kind of unpopular. Another thing that makes him unpopular, to say the least, is his writings for the Fatherland, which was a magazine based out of New York, I think, during the First World War, that was kind of, he wasn't necessarily in favour of Nazism, but it was definitely in favour of, like, let the Europeans sort it out, we should remain neutral. And actually what Hitler's doing might be quite good. That was the sort of vibe of this magazine. And Crowley was writing for it. He was, at that time, he became very into, well, it's not really that time, because so, as I said, he wasn't born Aleister Crowley. He changed his name to Aleister from Alexander because he wanted to be more Celtic. So he became like a bit of an Irish nationalist, and somehow he tied that together with Nazism. Not exactly sure how. But he was basically saying, I'm an Irish nationalist, and I think that Nazis aren't as bad as everyone says, and he was writing a lot about that. Interestingly, though, a lot of people think that this was kind of like counter-intel pro. Yeah. Which is basically the idea that, some people, that he's not saying what he really believes.
He made it more extreme in order to
make them look ridiculous.
Yes,
exactly. And that he was working for the British government doing this, which sounds like a crazy conspiracy theory, I thought when I read it.
But we all prefer to believe it, don't we?
Well, there is some evidence to support this. So what I found was, and there's a PDF of this online, I'll put a link in the show notes, is in 1918, there was a letter from the headquarters of the United States Military Academy that had, it was like a list of people. I think there was like 23 people on this list. People of interest. Like, we should look into these people, or we're looking into these people. Crowley's number 16. And they said, look, this dude, he's been out camping on, I don't know how to pronounce this, Esopus Island, just some island in a river in New York, I guess. I don't know. I'm sure our listeners know. He's been out there camping, just like sort of stumbling around. He's big, he's bald. He's put like weird red symbols on all the rocks around there. He's become a bit of a, like a fixture of the area because he's been out there so long, and people are bringing him food because he doesn't seem to have any food, and he's just generally being very odd on an island. And he knows this woman who's an actress who is sort of on our suspected of being a Nazi spy list. So, let's look into him. And they did. So this letter says, it was determined that Aleister Crowley was an employment of the British government, but present in the country on official business of which the British Council, New York City, has full cognizance. It was found that the British government was fully aware of the fact that Crowley was connected with this German propaganda and had received money for writing anti-British articles. In view of the information which has been gathered within the past 2 months, it may be possible that Aleister Crowley is double-crossing the British government. However, the case has not been completed as yet. So that's all that's written. That's the passage that's written about Crowley. Huh. So at that time, at least, the US military thought he was working for the British. We don't know whether they were right or not, but so it's not a crazy conspiracy theory to suggest that maybe he was. And the stuff that he wrote was absurd. But then again, everything he wrote was absurd. So it wouldn't really shock me. In fact, we had we haven't mentioned it yet, but he did say some things about about different races, and he sort of implied that women didn't have souls. He said lots of bad things, basically. And I brought this up with the OTO members, like, what do you think of this? And the first response the body master gave was, well, we're not Crowleyites, which I think is really cool. Like, really they don't have to believe everything he did. And then the other thing he said was, Crowley was really interested. One of the things about finding your HGA.
Sorry, I'm just laughing at Rebecca's cat.
Oh, Diego, don't do that. He's in our microphone box.
The smallest box in the world.
Oh, be gone, demon.
Continue.
So so the body master said basically that part of finding your HGA, you have to sort of let go of your identity in many ways. Yeah. Like all the things like, if you're born a Christian, you have to let go of that. If you've got like hang-ups about sex, for example, probably best to let go. This is not what he said.
Need to get laid.
He said you need to sort of let your identity go. And then many people find that part of the great work is letting go of your identity. And he speculates that maybe that's partly what Crowley was doing, trying on these different identities, trying out different ideas, trying out different voices, different costumes, as you said, different names throughout his life. So it's very hard to know what's like the authentic Crowley.
What Crowley are you going to get?
Yeah, and what's him just playing with ideas. So we don't really know. We don't know whether he was working for the British intelligence. And he was also kind of destitute. Like you said, he got this inheritance at age 18 from his father, and he had just been like absurdly generous and crazy with his money. He'd gone on all these mountaineering trips. He'd financed his friends to go on with him. He just would give people loads of money if they needed it. He was just like, typical rich kid. He didn't think about money. It was just a thing. And now it was the thing he didn't have. Also, as you said before, he got into opium. He was also prescribed heroin for asthma.
Wow.
Which was actually a thing at the time. That is what they prescribed. And became addicted. So yeah, it's not a very good situation. But he did have at this time a lodge now where they were working on developing the OTO, like an early OTO lodge. And they took members' dues. So he was getting a little bit of money to keep up with that. But he really wanted like a place to focus on Thelema and to get people working day and night really in the zone on the great work. So he sets up the Abbey of Thelema. And this,
where is this?
It's in Spain.
Wow.
Yeah, we can go, maybe. Yeah. It's said to be haunted, unsurprisingly. And there are still all sorts of weird drawings that he did on the walls of the ruined abbey. So it's based, like you said, on how do you pronounce it? Rabelais?
Yeah.
Francois Rabelais? Yeah. So it's based on what he read about in that book. It's kind of utopian community / magical school where people can sort of develop spiritually and magically together. And he had like a couple of members, I don't know exactly how many. Some of them had kids, but it was sort of a functioning community. And they would just do their rituals all day and probably do a lot of drugs and sex magic and just like do exactly what they wilt. Yeah, exactly. Unfortunately, some of these party poopers caused trouble amongst his Thelemites there. So there's a guy called Raoul Loveday who died, and his wife was furious. They were both in the abbey together. She went back to London and said, "This terrible Crowley man, he killed my husband by making him drink the blood of a cat we sacrificed, and it poisoned him, and that's why he died. And oh no." I think I'm being really unkind to this woman. I don't know why. Anyway, so she was distraught. Her husband had just died. She went back, told the tabloids horror stories, which may or may not have been true. I'm leaning towards not, but who knows. It seems more likely that Raoul died from dysentery because they were drinking like dirty water out of streams there. But anyway, the point is, it gets out that he's doing bad shit over there in Spain. Mussolini hears about it and he's like, "I don't want you in my country." Imagine being thrown out
by
Mussolini. Yeah, so he's out on his ear. He has to leave the Thelema, and now the whole press is united against him, basically. Right. That's where the wickedest man in the world line comes. That was like a headline at the time. Like, everyone hates him. Everyone thinks he's a bad dude. And now he's even more unpopular. As an occultist, people think he's a Nazi sympathizer. It's not looking good for him. Sorry, it was Italy, not Spain. Hence Mussolini, obviously. Yeah. So I don't know whether this is related, but for the sake of storytelling, this is a good time for him to fake his own death.
Of course.
Which he did in 1930.
Amazing.
But he thought better of it and came back a few weeks later for an art show that he was putting on. Because someone like him, like Crowley, he can't stay quiet and stay out of the public eye for that long.
He's such a character. For some reason, he reminds me of Cartman from South Park for some reason. Isn't he? It's just such a ridiculous character.
I would love to see a little South Park style illustration story of Crowley's life. That'd be amazing.
Completely. If they haven't already done it. Yeah.
So this is when he really gets into suing people. So he's already sued Mathers. He starts suing loads of people for all sorts of things. Stealing his ideas. No, that's right. Mathers sued him, so maybe he gave him the idea. But Crowley starts suing other people. It's not working out so well. But he is at some point successful in giving up cocaine. I'm kind of messing up the storyline.
You said giving out cocaine?
Giving up cocaine. And heroin.
Distributing. He becomes
He's like on and off again. You know how it is. I'm messing up the story a bit because, of course, I just said that he was renowned as a Nazi sympathizer, but we're still before World War II. So anyway,
sure.
Writing the Fatherland was during World War I, I think.
Yeah.
So World War II's a brewing, and he gets really interested in Nazism, but he decides that Hitler is a black magician. So it's like he's interested for a while, and he's like, no, thank you. It's no good. At this point, he offers his services to the Allies, but is declined. Who knows why?
God, he could have been... Well, actually, continue with this.
Well, the thing is, maybe if... So there are lots of ways to think about this. Crowley says he offered his service to the Allies, but was declined. So is this him saying, I worked for you in World War I. Would you have me back for World War II?
Yeah.
Or is it he never worked for them, and this is the first offer?
And they were like, no, you said bad things.
Yeah. Or was he just too crazy for them now? Like, he worked for them in World War I, and now they're like, he's too crazy? Sure. Or did he... Yeah, who knows? Or maybe that's just the line they told him to say, and he did work for them, but he just had to say that he was declined. Yeah, it's impossible to figure it out. There's just so many claims that completely baseless coming from Crowley and from other people. But because of the war, he can't get his German asthma medication, so this is when he pops back on heroin. And there's like... It's a whole thing.
It's so sad.
Yeah, like, it's a really tragic... I mean... Yeah, it's a tragic time. And there's this weird... I don't know how to describe it. Like, because, Hitler was fascinated by the occult, and lots of his high-up people were fascinated by the occult. So the Allies were thinking, maybe we can use this to our advantage, somehow mislead them. I'm just speaking off the top of my head now because I didn't research this specifically, but I think there was some like trying to do fake astrology, so to encourage Hitler to attack in certain places and certain days by misleading them with astrology.
Yeah. So did they get somebody in and you're right. I don't know how it all happened, but I feel like there was some misleading using bad astrology deliberately.
Bad astrology. And there's actually several people around here at the time who were famous British occultists, or to become famous British occultists, who were sort of in the mix. There's a guy called Cecil Williamson, who he's the guy who founded the Museum of Witchcraft and Magic, which I went on a little trip to a couple of weeks ago, which is down in Cornwall. Oh my God, it's amazing. It's really, really good. But he was around at the time, a bit younger than Crowley, I think, at that time. And he was definitely, on Wikipedia, it lists his occupation as MI6 operative, warlock.
Excellent.
Amazing. So yeah, he's a warlock, and he was in the mix, as I say. And then you've also got Gerald Gardner, who's the founder of Wicker. All three of these people, Crowley, Cecil Williamson, and Gardner, have claimed, or it's been claimed about them, that they did this. It's a very well-known classic Wiccan ceremony. I guess it's not Wiccan; it's probably predates Wicca, called the Cone of Power, where you stand in a circle. And you sort of raise energy. You feel that like waves of vibrations coming through your body from chanting, sometimes dancing in a circle. Right. But the point is to get that sort of tingly feeling flowing through your body. And you visualize a cone coming up from the people standing there on the ground. And then you send it out to do your magical intention. Okay. Very classic spell. And you can see why it would feel very powerful when you're doing something like that, especially with all the right, ceremonial garb or no garb in the case of Gardner, who would have preferred to do it skyclad, naked. But anyway, so all three of those guys claim, or as I say, has been claimed about them, that they did that to stop Hitler coming over the channel, to protect England, and Hitler never came across the channel. So you do the maths. I think Aleister Crowley. There's a guy called Amado Crowley who claims to be Crowley's son. He's dead now. But he's not mentioned in any of Crowley's diaries or anything. So I don't know what the deal is with this guy, but he's the one who says, that Crowley did this, and it was called Operation Mistletoe. Cecil Williamson said, I worked for MI6, and it was called Operation Cone of Power. Gerald Gardner says, it wasn't me, it was like all the covens, all the witches' covens came across all over Europe for the first time, because they had to, usually you would keep it secret, you wouldn't be networked like that. And they came together in the New Forest to do it. Whoa. So it's just one of those weird, like, stories.
And a story, but that happened, right? I mean, it sounds like that happened.
I mean, who knows? Yeah, there could well be a seed of truth in it. It is a practice that people do. Have you done people interested in the occult? Of course I have. Yeah, it's another story. So anyway, we're getting towards the last chapter of his life now. This World War II is over. His reputation is in tatters. But I don't think he's too bothered about that, because he's living off donations mainly from the Agape Lodge, which, as I mentioned earlier, is the one that's running in America, which has become kind of a bigger thing now, and there are some important people involved in it. So there's Jack Parsons, who's a rocket engineer. There's a TV show on about him right now called Strange Angel. Cool. That's what the OTO guys mentioned to us. They said they couldn't tell us whether it was realistic or not. Wow. Because it features a lot.
He's such a fascinating character.
Yeah, he's so cool. It's a really good show, actually.
Great. And
at that same lodge, L. Ron Hubbard is there.
Oh my God.
Yeah, although Crowley doesn't like him. Crowley thinks he's a bit weird, which is saying a lot from Crowley. Right. I don't know, the way I read it was like almost like they were too similar. Like he saw someone who was doing the same thing that he was up to. Like, oh no, I know this guy's gay. Yeah. He's got the same sort of intense, controlling.
Like two of them couldn't exist together. They couldn't really be friends. Yeah. Even though I think L. Ron Hubbard did say that Crowley was his friend, but really Crowley did not like him.
Yeah. And I think L. Ron Hubbard had an affair with Jack Parsons' wife.
Which is fine. Jack Parsons was fine with it.
Oh, okay, cool. Well, anyway, for whatever reason, obviously L. Ron Hubbard goes his own way and starts Scientology. He doesn't stay in the OTO. But so that, he's getting a little trickle of income from the Agape Lodge. But it's not really that much. He moves to Hastings, which, as I said, is not far from where we live, which is where he meets Gerald Gardner. Gerald Gardner at that time is in his early 60s. It's like 7 years before Gardner kicks off Wicker. Which is when the last Witchcraft Act is repealed and Gardner goes public and says, I'm a witch, everyone should be a witch. So 7 years before that happens, he meets Crowley. And Crowley actually says, hey, why don't you take over running the OTO in the UK? Because it's like America is going well, but the UK isn't going so well and I need a little bit of cash. Yeah. So can you make this a bigger deal? And Gardner is initiated and runs it for a bit, but obviously he has his own bigger fish to fry with inventing Wicker. And during this time is also when he designed the Thoth tarot deck.
Yeah, Crowley designed that.
Yeah.
Did he work with somebody?
Yeah, what's her name? Lady. She's a lady. Lady Frida Harris. I think she did all the art.
It's amazing.
Yeah, beautiful tarot cards. I would have an episode about tarot coming up, but I'm not sure we'll talk about Thoth. It might be too much. Anyway, yeah. So he's living in Hastings in a boarding house. Can you remember what the address is, what the name of that street is? Because we went there yesterday. Netherwood.
Close,
and I think the house that he was in was called Netherwood House, but now it's just like a little suburban crescent called Netherwood Crescent.
It's really like exciting looking, but that house is the most exciting looking one. All the other houses are just like, I guess, were they built in the 70s? I don't know. But
the house that is still there is like one tiny part of the bigger house in which he was lodged. Right. It was hard to get, like, sometimes you get that feeling of like, oh, I'm in the place where, but it was hard to get that feeling in the suburbs.
It's the most suburban thing I've ever seen.
Anyway, so and he's got a guy who's sort of doing secretary work in exchange for magical teaching. And who knows what else, let's face it. Eventually, 1st of December, 1947, he dies of chronic bronchitis, and there's a ceremony in Brighton Crematorium, which the papers label a black mass, obviously. And that is the end of Crowley's life.
Kind of went out with a bit of a fizzle.
Yeah. But I think not as much of as a fizzle as people say. Like, often if you just Google Crowley, as I want to do, you'll see, he died in infamy and penniless. I don't think he died penniless. He still had somewhere to live. He had a guy he was teaching. He designed the tarot deck.
The lodges were running. And
his lodge was already up and running, in America at least.
Yeah.
And obviously his influence lives on.
It really does.
In so many ways.
Yeah. So what do you think? I mean, I'd be interested to know if he was... what he believed. Like, was he an atheist? Was he a polytheist?
Yeah, were these deities he was talking about real? Were they aspects of his mind?
And again, this is something we kind of talked about when we met up with the other OTO members. And it's just so uncertain. And looking into, whenever I study any of these people, like Yates as well, it's just never clear what they really thought those deities were. What is the HGA? Like, I mean, I would say that if anything, it seems closest to polytheistic, because you can't deny that there are these different deities. There are multiple deities at the same time, and they don't seem to bow down to this one god, but there does seem to be this individualistic focus, whether it's on the true self, yourself as a star, or the HGA, which is like, I mean, again, what is it?
I did ask, like, can you be an atheist and be a Thelemite? And they said, a kind of. They said, because you are kind of your own god. So I don't know whether you could technically call that an atheist, but I think basically the answer was yeah. And then I went on to say, can you be a materialist and be a Thelemite? And that was where they were a bit like, I mean, they didn't want to say no, because that would, they wouldn't want to violate my will. But I did feel like you have to believe in at least some element of the supernatural. Like, if I said, okay, my conception of Thelema is this is all like a really sort of beautiful, ornate form of self-help. The rituals are psychological tools, and I think they'd be like, yeah, that's interesting, but I don't think they'd really think it was Thelema.
Well, it's almost like you're only getting, like, it's like having a cake of light, and like only eating like a cherry from it, and you're not eating like all of the rest.
It's like the
of
cake
the
of light without the menstrual blood. So that's what you're saying.
But and like saying that if you don't believe in the soul, like it becomes a bit like, so what are you doing here? And like I'm sure they wouldn't like not allow you. It's more just like, well, can you really get enough out of this? But it sounds like you think you could get something out of it anyway. It doesn't really matter.
Yeah, I definitely think. I think if you saw it, as I say, it's like a sort of self-development tool. I think you can get a lot out of it. And I think the idea of, although I'm not convinced that there is a true self, and if I dig down deep enough, I'll find it. The way I see it, and I think modern psychology agrees with me, there's a brilliant book. I think I've recommended it before on this podcast. It's called Selfie by a guy called Will Storr. And it takes you on a journey through like the modern conception of the self. And this whole idea that there is a true self lurking deep inside us that we can access if we do enough navel gazing is kind of bullshit. Basically, like self is a kind of a construct that gets put together moment to moment. I mean, this is what we learned from the Buddhists, which was why I was curious about how.
Sure.
And these things that we think of, I mean, obviously there are certain sort of default personality settings that we're born with. So you could think of that as your true self, I suppose. But the idea that there's like lurking inside you, this real you, and you can eventually get to it, I'm not buying that.
What if that true self is basically, what about the idea of conscience?
What do you mean?
Like your conscience, your like moral compass.
I think that is evolving and changing as well. I don't think that's like static and you can find it and that's...
But you could say that that's like the truest, bestest thing. I mean, you're searching for truth. I wonder if like there's an inner truth as well. There's like this is the right way to be. I mean, you definitely, it's not like you don't have any of your own belief systems. It's like morally you eat in a certain way. And it's like that's part of Rebecca's true self.
Yeah.
For you to just go and binge on like cheese and chow down on hamburger, that's not your true self.
Well, yeah, but I think things like that are kind of like, this is a moral code that I've constructed based on my experience and my knowledge. I don't think it's something that was like hidden inside me that I had to get to.
That's fine. It still exists. You're just, the only difference there is you're saying you weren't like, it wasn't like breathed into you or something. You're saying you constructed this. I mean, I don't know what that you is that constructed it, but let's just say something has formed in the course of your life, which is better and truer than all of the crap and like the concerns and worries and like bad thoughts that you might have on a day-to-day basis. This is, you know, like, me so well. Just describing to a T. No, there is some cool thing which is like your best self, let's say.
That's an interesting idea, your best self. I like that, but I would think of it more...
Living my best life.
More as like aspirational. Like there are people I admire, and maybe my HGA could be a sort of vision of what I'd like to be like.
It could be me.
It could be you. Yeah, so I do think maybe there is a way to interpret it, but it's sure. I don't see it being done by any...
It doesn't have to be so magical, basically.
Yeah.
Right.
So, yeah, what do you think? Would we recommend this to our listeners? Would we recommend them again? Are there any harms from getting involved in the OTO or in Thelema? Or digging too deep into Crowley's work, full stop?
Well, it depends. I think if you knew... I was about to call him Cartman, but yeah, if you knew Crowley from back in the day, good Lord, I mean, he seems to be the classic cult leader. He was clearly a bit of a shit to people.
Yeah, like all of his lovers ended up insane or dead or addicted to drugs or all three. Yeah.
So in that sense, like, good thing he's dead. Like, God bless Crowley, but like, it's kind of...
How can you say that on his feast of death?
Oh, God. Sorry, Crowley. But the thing is, what I've learned so far about Thelema is that it's very safe. It's calling on things I'm like literally already doing, like yoga, meditation, like a bunch of things that aren't that extreme and are probably just generally good for you. They're actually pretty wholesome. What I also love is that it really feeds the mind. You can take something and like look into it further, like all of the Kabbalah stuff. It's really helped me guide a lot of my own like research into these kind of like occulty things, and it's been really great fun. So it's just it's very it's feeding me a lot.
Yeah, I think we'd be remiss if we don't mention that Thelema has had a little bit of a controversy going on. In fact, there's a hashtag. The hashtag is respect the no in OTO.
Oh, for goodness sake. They've been me too'd.
They've been me too'd, yeah. But which is not that super surprising, because it is kind of a libertarian philosophy about self, and there's the sex magic. So it might well attract, I don't think this is what the people we met like, and it's probably not what the majority of Thelemites are like, but I can imagine it might attract more people who are kind of like a bit selfish and a bit, sex mad, especially if they read about Crowley and think, oh, this sounds good, I want to get me some sex magic. They're like, oh, I'm just going to have to talk about self-development and philosophy for years before I get to anything like that, if it ever happens. But there's a woman called Sister Georgia, and she's written a couple of blog posts and is generally the driver behind Respect the No and OTO, the sort of person who kicked it off, who was pretty brave in talking about her experiences, where she's been... There are all these, this horrible grey area stuff where she was drunk and a guy took advantage, but, how was he to know how drunk she was? And it's just nasty, life.
Yeah, grey areas. Yeah, life.
Yeah. And she feels like she's been taken advantage of, basically, and that the OTO need to shape up and get better at protecting women within the order, which, it's not unique to the OTO.
The world right
now. Yeah, exactly. But... I thought it should be mentioned.
Yeah.
And the other thing, obviously, is the whole racist, classist, misogynist stuff that Crowley said. And
we can't just say, oh, he was a man of his times. It's like, well, yeah, but if we're still following his teachings, we do have to take that terrible stuff into account.
But they're not Crowleyites.
Right.
And the other reason why, on the Hare Krishna episode, I was pretty hard on you about Prabhupada and the horrible things he said.
Yeah, take it back.
But you know what? The thing is, Crowley never claimed to be perfect. Prabhupada said he was giving you divine wisdom, that he was in contact, that he was divine. Crowley never said that. He invented a system, and he was a flawed person working on himself. I've got a quote from D. Ligi Libellum. Let this then be of great comfort to you all, that if I be so imperfect, and for very shame I have not emphasized that imperfection, if I, the chosen one, still fail, then how easy for yourselves to surpass me. Or, should you only equal me, then even how great attainment should be yours. Be of good cheer, therefore, for my failure and my success are arguments of courage for yourselves. So, I'm not perfect. Work the system. It works if you work it.
Right.
Maybe you did for me, eh? But yeah, so, yeah, be careful out there, people, especially if you're female people. But I didn't sense any kind of weird vibes from these guys at all.
No, if anything, I'm considering joining, if I could, partly because what I think it also offers, if you do want to join something like the OTO, is having a community, a family, as it were, to do this stuff, and to learn, doing this stuff on your own. And I found this similarly with astrology. It's it's too hard to do it on your own. You have to find other people who can share their knowledge with you. And this is something that I'm personally really drawn to, and I'm sure a lot of people who find this work are drawn to. Though, that said, it's also something you can do on your own, which also appeals to me. I quite like that idea as well.
Yeah.
And I keep saying it, but all that HGA stuff I really, really like. There's definitely seems to be a lot there for me. I can't really see it.
It's so funny that at the end of the Hare Krishna episode, I was like, okay, please don't join the Hare Krishnas. I'm really worried they might be a cult. But we're coming to the end of this episode about Aleister Crowley, and you're like, I might join the OTO. I'm like, yeah, why not?
I know. And you just compared Crowley and Prabhupada and said Prabhupada is worse.
I do think he was worse. Seriously, on my scoreboard of weird dudes that invented religion, Crowley is coming up with a better score than Prabhupada.
Oh my god!
But only for the hypocrisy.
Okay, so Rebecca, what do you think about the Crowley thing?
I don't think it's something I'll be pursuing, of Thelema in general, but I have found it fascinating diving into Crowley's life, and I can definitely see why this would be useful for people. And I don't think it's super harmful at all. Compared to many of the other things we talk about on the show, I don't think it's harmful. And the very fact that they are having a Me Too moment and recognizing that there is problems is impressive. A lot of religions don't get around to doing that. So yeah, I think it's pretty cool, basically. And I started I started a magical diary, as suggested by David Shoemaker and Living Thelema, in part just so that I could actually figure out what Thelema was and be able to talk about it. Like
any excuse.
Any excuse. I think I'll keep that up. It's
Nice.
basically just like a bullet journal where you mark off how well you're doing in different areas of your life, but it's cooler because you break down into your life into the different aspects which are represented by different sigils and stuff. It's pretty cool.
So the elements, right? So
The
like, it's
elements, yeah.
So good.
So like air would be intellect, for example.
Right.
So if I read on a day, then I get a point in that next to that sigil in my little book.
It's where magic and self-development completely meet.
Yeah.
And I can't see that being a bad thing. It's almost like, how can you make what can be kind of dry self-development, cognitive behavioral therapy kind of stuff, like making that more interesting and poetic and like visual,
and having the whole psychological element of ritual added to it
Yes.
as well, so it sort of sticks, because I think a lot of the we've talked before about self-development stuff and how you can just read books, but
right?
do you ever actually act on them?
Yeah.
And if you do you keep it up, and how do you form habits
And embody these ideas.
Exactly. Ritual is the answer to all of those things. So yeah, I think there's a space in the market for a sort of Thelema, but sort of reworked to be more self-developmenty.
Yeah, and a little bit more new school and not necessarily so theistic.
Yeah,
maybe.
I don't think I'm going to be the one that's going to do that.
Oh my
but
God,
maybe.
I would. Yeah,
I'm not
add
sure how
another
the
thing to the
OTO would
list.
feel about that either.
Yeah.
Although they can't really complain because you have to do as thou
It's
wilt.
my will. I feel all festive now.
Yeah, what a lovely Christmas episode. So we should just finish by saying what we say. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law.
Love is the law. Love and a will.
Merry Christmas, everyone.
Merry Christmas. Well, we hope you enjoyed this episode. Let us know with a tweet or an email. We'd really love to hear about your experiences.
Yes, please tell us what we got wrong. You can email us at hello@seekerandskeptic.com and follow us on Twitter and Instagram @seekerskeptic.
You'll find the show notes for this and every episode at seekerandskeptic.com.
And if you're interested, you can find my skeptically themed comics at rebeccaonpaper.com or follow me on Twitter @RebeccaOnPaper.
And I'm at yoga_astrology on Twitter. And you can find me exploring the intersection of yoga and astrology at yogaandastrology.com.
If you liked what you heard and fancy supporting the show and spreading the word, we'd really appreciate a rating and review in the Apple Podcast Store or wherever you're listening.
Or just tell somebody you know about the show. Thanks for listening.